Good evening and namaste, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the 2.5 Front War, India's Internal Security Challenges Conference. I am Sneha Kathy Sebastian, a research associate with the forum. In this session, we will analyze India's counter-terrorism approach. The session chair is Colonel DPK Pillai. Colonel Dr. Divagaran Padmakumar Pillai, Shaurya Chakra, is a former Indian Army officer. He is an experienced military professional with a demonstrated history of working in key positions at the National Security and Ministry of Defense. A war veteran who has proved his mettle under fire, risking his own life to uphold humanitarian principles. Pillai sir is skilled in management, leadership, strategic planning, change management, and training. In 2015, he was awarded a PhD by Punjab University for his thesis focused on evaluation of models of human security with special reference to India. The speakers for this session are Lieutenant General Ashok Shwane, PVSM, AVSM, VSM, Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, PVSM, AVSM, and SM, Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, PVSM, AVSM, ADC, NM, and BAR, Lieutenant General Vinod Khandare, PVSM, AVSM, and SM, and lastly, Dr. Devi Prasad, retired IRS officer. Now, I request Pillai sir to continue with the session. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everyone. Jai Hind. It's a matter of honor for me to share the stage with such distinguished panelists today. I look up to all of them, each and every speaker that we have, and I thank Indic Forum for organizing this very important discussion on a matter that actually touches every Indian's life, because you never know. Unlike border wars, these are issues that can actually strike at us at any place, at any point of choosing. Really can't be prepared for that. So we all are aware that India has been facing a lot of terrorism issue, and it is something that has been since its independence. But I just want to quickly touch the idea of terrorism as a tool that was used. And, it's believed that the Assassins, the ones who were there in the Iran, used terror as a tactic to intimidate their rulers then. And sometime around in 1605, we had the Guy Fawkes who wanted to blow up the British Parliament and had kind of laid a large amount of explosives. It was discovered. Luckily, they wanted to kill James I when the Westminster was being inaugurated and install a puppet so that the Protestants could be removed and a Catholic form of government could come. And terror has been used in various forms and methods by people to kind of exercise their will. And India, in closer times that we see, in more modern times, we've seen of use of terror in Soviet Union, in the killing of the Tsar, and also during the time that Israel had to come up. But more modern, like in our own lifetimes, we've seen it in the creation of the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the movements that we have seen. We've seen the Munich Black September in Munich in 1972. And then 1979, we've seen a great change that took place globally. There are three major events that took place. One is the overthrow of the Shah of Iran and taking over by the Ayatollah. And then there was the siege of the Saudi, the Holy Mosque, and also the invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviet Union. It actually changed the entire idea of terror, use of terror and terror tactics. And then 2001 happened, and in our own country, we've seen what happened in the parliament attacks, where attack was attempted, and we've seen. So there are many. India faces a large number. Since our independence, we've been essentially driven by the fact that Pakistan was created. It was an Islamic state meant for the refuge, but truly not a state for the Islam, because it wasn't really what it intended to be. And they have actually unleashed a series of wars since 1947, within 2 months of being independent. And I think very clearly the British were hands in glove with them. And that's why they could actually plan an operation at the scale that was seen in October 1947 that lasted for until the 1st of January 1949. And since then, they've tried every single trick in the book. And it is 79's invasion and their importance that came up that actually allowed them to recognize the power of terror, and they've unleashed a war on us. In addition to this radicalized an Islamic war, we also find a lot of political religious violence and ethnic sub-regionalism and the politics of identity that kind of create issues that are there. So terrorism in India can actually be recognized as cross-border terrorism and terrorism in the hinterland and extreme violence and violent extremism. Something that we saw in Sri Lanka about 2 years ago, when up to urban and well-to-do people carried out attacks on a Sunday, on a Good Friday. So I'm really privileged to be chairing a session in which we have the former Director General Mech Forces. I have the privilege of belonging to mechanized infantry, the Brigade of Guards, and we have General Shahane, who is one of the most distinguished Armored Corps officers, who's an alumni of NDA, who's seen 39 years of service in the armed forces. He's a very active member in several non-governmental organizations, which have diverse, and also striking a lot of think tanks and others. So I would, without any delay, I would like to hand over the seminar, the proceedings to General Shivani to address national security contours and counterterrorism construct. So let's hear from him. We have about 15 to 20 minutes. And then, of course, whatever questions you may have, may kindly put it in the chat box here. Over to General Shivani. So I think your mic is muted. Hello?
Can you hear me now? Am I audible?
We can hear you, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Colonel Pillai, and thank you so much, Indic Research Forum, for giving this opportunity to me to speak on a subject which entails two aspects. One is the national security contours and the counter-terrorism strategy construct. So I'll be dealing essentially at the policy level of both these, because specifics of each condition or each place which impacted by these had either been covered or would be covered subsequently. Suffice to say, when you talk of the national security construct as such, it's important to keep our eyes wide and confident in the means to protect your national security interests. And therefore, when you look at the geostrategic flux, four things come to my mind. One is the decline in US global power status and its re-entrenchment, particularly in terms of its global standing, its controversy of being the only nation in the world to have come up front to bring forth the global war on terrorism, fight terrorism, and yet hand over territory back to the terrorists. It's also resulted in a major, let's say, not fall, but status in terms of the global arena, both in geoeconomics and geopolitics. The second event is the rise of China, which has given impetus to global realignments which have taken place, and Asia's reassessment. When we talk of China's rise and its realignment, you find that it's essentially into three concentric circles which are impacting 5 countries. Inner circle, it has Pakistan and Russia, so it covers Asia and Europe. Next circle, it has got Iran, it covers the Middle East, and outer circle, it has got Venezuela, Central America, and South Africa. Besides that, its BRI has stretched world over. So its influence and cohesion are both interlinked and expanding. Then you have the upheaval in Europe, where fragmentation is coming up. They're more inward looking. There is less oxygen for for out-of-area contingencies, or let's say participation in such events. And the euro is also taking an impact. So it's inward looking as of now. And the fourth thing that is taking place, I think, is the turmoil in the Islamic world, where sustained low-level conflict or terrorism, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's North Africa or Central Asia, continues to be. So therefore, that's the world we're going to live in. That's a world in which we have to protect our values, our culture, our national interests. And then you have certain global realities which have manifested itself. And if you read the Global Terrorism Index, or you read the CIPRI, global power spendings, or the future conflicts and their gradations into the types, you come across a few interesting facts. The first is that COVID, counterterrorism, and climate change have been the key challenges, and the most life-taking events of 2021. Yet, in spite of COVID, the military spending rose by 2.6% in real terms, and the global GDP dipped by 4.4%. So it's indicating to us that conflicts have not been impacted by COVID. In fact, they're rising. And when they're rising, there's also a study which says the risk of conflict will increase over the next 2 decades because of the power plays that have come up, the terrorist threats, the instability of weak states, and the spread of disruptive technologies. In the Global Terrorist Index, interestingly comes out that out of the 195 countries in the world, 163 are impacted in some way or the other by terrorist attacks, which is 83.5% of the world. And 90% of the global conflicts today are subconventional. And in this, Asia is emerging as not only the economic center of gravity, but also the center of conflict zones and competition. And that's where India comes in as the regional security anchor, and its increasing importance. Therefore, we have to reimagine the security calculus. There's an upsurge of unparalleled political warfare involving more capabilities and a greater exercise. And when I talk political warfare, it is political means, diplomatic means, economic means, partial military means, intelligence, cyber, space. Ultimate aim is to target the adversary's will and decision making, and that's in short called strategic coercion. Then there is the diffusion of war and peace. Very difficult to define war and peace today. Or is it war or it's a peace condition? And therefore, shaping narratives and perceptions are impacting security and the notion of victory. Technology is expanding in its domains. Today, the war is not between just nation or defense forces. It's war impacting society and the people at large. And therefore, diverse means and gray zone preferences have come up both in peace and war. Then there is the aspect and importance of reliance, self-reliance, and self-sufficiency, both. And that's going to be the key to our capability, credibility, and communication of national interest. And lastly, terrorism and proxy war will continue to constitute major threats, yet globally their definition remains both undefined, transformational, and in the eyes of the beholder. So under these, we have to look at a national security objective, which is well known, which is defense of national territory and resources, peace and secure internal environment, empowering the nation and its economy, strengthening the nation's position in Asia and in international region, and promoting and harnessing India's role in the emerging global order from a spectator to a player. And this is when we have no extraterritorial ambitions except what is ours and what had been taken away from us that continues to be ours? Do we have no ideologies which we want to, weigh on others? Or, for that matter of fact, look at our nation in terms of strategic alliances with others? We know we don't believe in that. And therefore, when you look at the military prognosis of it, in the time zones and the probability, certainly low intensity conflict, 4GW, is going to persist during war and peace. And certainly limited wars and confrontation is possible and most likely. Conventional wars are possible, but maybe less likely, and nuclear wars or nuclear conflict unlikely. So that's the major canvas of the national security construct. Now you look at counterterrorism strategy. If you look at the global counterterrorism index, this land of India, land of Buddha and Gandhi, is today the 8th most affected nation by terrorism. Afghanistan is 1, Pakistan is 7, and India is 8th. Now there is somehow a link with Pakistan being in the center as the global fountainhead of terrorism, and we all know how Taliban got and its network got birthed there and got oxygen to both its neighbors in Afghanistan and in India. So that becomes central to it. Yet what is interesting is that India, who's been subjected to insurgency, terrorism right after its birth since independence, has the lowest number of terrorists, lowest number of deaths by terrorism, and also has the lowest lethality rates of attack by terrorists. So that means somewhere this counterterrorism policy of ours is working well. We had a policy which was more passive, and India actually came to the fore, and when 26/11 was equated to its 9/11. And there was a policy shift which took place after the Uri attack, when surgical strikes took place on a wider front. But more importantly was the Balakot airstrike and the abrogation of Article 370 and 35 Alpha, where history was corrected, which brought in a shift in the policy construct against terrorism. And therefore, from a passivity of strategic constraint to a punitive retribution was brought in. There was rubbishing of the nuclear restraint, and that limited wars like Kargil and strikes with escalation control mechanism in place was the new normal. So military capability, political will, or its credibility, and strategic communication came to the fore, unlike the past. And therefore, the nation started addressing terrorism, not just terrorists. Now, when you talk of terrorism strategy, there are 3 policy pillars. One is insurgency and terrorism are political issue. Military force is an instrument to bring about control and stability into them. That's important to understand, and that's something which is emphasized. Then there is a distinction which has to be made between the local violent uprisings as a result of dissatisfaction or economic deprivation by a section of population, and proxy war or terrorism by a country like Pakistan. So they have to be differentiated. Though if you look at Kashmir, there's a war in Kashmir and there's a war of Kashmir. Both have linkages. But then the tools and mechanism to address them have to have a little difference too. And then we look at the employment of minimum force, but punitive for those in the proxy war. So therefore, in short, integrated, innovative, and coordinated focus is required in the conflict resolution for counterterrorism. But often what happens is suppression of violence is taken as an establishment piece. Actually, for peace to set in for in a counterterrorism or a counterinsurgency environment, you have to have three stages. One is the stage of enforced peace, or also at times called the negative peace, where you suppress the violence and bring in some sort of sanity into this thing where they do not have a freedom of movement, the terrorists. Then there's a stage of adequate peace wherein the law and order machinery is restored. Violence suppressed, but this goes to the next level, which it, at times in our parlance also call it as a positive control. And there's a time when the appropriate conditions are there for the political process to start. And finally, the last stage and the final stage is the enduring peace, where violence is eliminated, governance starts to take place or gets embedded into the thing, and there's rehabilitation, de-radicalization, and capacity building. So these are the key. The policies has to approach to these have to be a balance between terrorist-centric approach, people-centric approach, and the perception management approach. The balance weighs as per the stage at which you are countering them. And like I said, uh, usually it's in stage two that we normally remain adequate peace. And the stage three, where political machinery and the governance comes, is the most challenging, as I guess. So the policy construct of the Indian counterterrorism policy or mechanism lies in three or four issues. One is the belief that the kinetic energy of the bullet is less powerful than the potential energy of the mind. Earlier, there was a lot of emphasis on the number game, but since now, we have realized that there is critical thinking, there is innovative thought, and terrorism is not just about killing terrorists. There's much more to it. So it's not only a number game. And therefore, social life empowerment through inclusive growth, addressing poverty, corruption, and providing education means economic security, employment remain the keys. Also, along with this, is the importance of the administrative reforms, judicial reforms, the political reforms, which have to be people centric, so that there's no space for terror. And technologies plays a major role both for kinetic and non-kinetic means. So there has to be a whole of nation approach at the strategic level in which you deny the three M's, which is men, which is the recruitment, the material to them for terrorism, and the funding or the money. And therefore, these are important. But what is most important is to target the ideology and radicalism holistic. And understanding of ideology and radicalism is much, much more than just the military. It is a psychological process. It's a very technical process in which you have to have an anti-radicalization policy, you have to have a counter-radicalization policy, and you have to have a de-radicalization policy. And role of social media and role of the local population and elders become very important. Also, when you look at counterterrorism, development, empowerment, and security are the drivers of mainstreaming. Therefore, goodwill, governance, and inclusive growth is very important. Social empowerment through growth, poverty education are spoken of, and the need for a carrot and stick policy is also critical. So therefore, at the operational level, the focus is of the policy to deny entry, safe havens, resources, and space, attrite the leadership, because that affects the morale and of the cadre. It has to be intelligence-based, surgical, and swift operation. Dismember the linkages to deny collision between terrorists, overground workers, political nexus, and the people, exposing the corrupt practices and selfish motives, and people-centering. The last issue that I would like to highlight before I round up is what are the mechanisms that we need to look at to strengthen this policy, counter-terrorism policy of ours. Having had limited exposure, I would say, particularly in the Valley and in Punjab, I think there are 3 or 4 things that we as a nation need to look at. Firstly, I think there is a need for an integrated structure at the apex level. Uh, Whether you have it in terms of Ministry of Internal Security Affairs, but certainly there requires a greater focus, greater cohesion for policy continuity and synergy between all the mechanisms so that a whole of nation approach is taken. There has to be focused budgeting, focused policy reforms, and of course, the absence of national security strategy is another void which needs to be addressed. The second thing that comes to mind is what I've seen myself is the importance of center-state and interstate coordination. This harmony to address the problems, particularly in terms of governance, it's very critical. By only governance, even in terms of security forces. Therefore, this is something which in a democracy is challenging, but has to be done when you say nation above all. The third aspect is empowering the state police and the intelligence agency. Now, there have to be reforms, structures, restructuring, equipping, and many other things because ultimately the state police and the PMF and the CPOs have to take over this responsibility of internal security and relieve the army from primary tasks. Today, you have major threats on your borders, and you cannot have dual attention or dual focus, internal and external. So the earlier we empower the state forces and intelligence agencies and central CPOs and such forces to relieve the army, it's critical. Fourth aspect is something which is, given glossed over is the importance of cyber and IW specialists. No more can you have generalists in uniform saying that we will be take care of our cyber and IW aspects. These require proactive competence to address radicalism, ideology, and to give a terrorist a counter negative. So this is an important area which has not got its due, and we need to optimize technology and collaboration on this front. And lastly, we have to garner global support and coordination so that there's no safe haven nor any fountainheads in this thing. And therefore, I'd like to end with a quote from our Prime Minister who said, we should pass the UN's Comprehensive Convention for International Terrorism. At least it will be clearly established whom you view as a terrorist and whom you don't. We need to de-link terrorism from religion to isolate terrorists who use this interchange of arguments between terrorism and religion. Thank you very much. It will be a pleasure to take on any questions, either immediately or at the end of the session. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir, for this very detailed presentation that you made. You've taken us through the entire national security comprehensive review of our threats that is existing, explained to us what are the issues that we've been facing, whether it's 2611 and how we've actually handled them, and and from our policy changing from addressing terrorists piecemeal to terrorism as a whole, and a policy that has changed from containing this to retribution, as we've seen in Uri and Balakot strikes. And it's a very interesting the way we've actually taken us across the whole thing. And you've also addressed the various issues that are there, the process on which you can actually restore order, and why the military is a force that can be used to bring about a state that actually restoring it to going back to governance and other makes it easy. And your 3 M's about men, material, and money, restricting them is an important aspect that which all policymakers, and your suggestion about creating a ministry for counterterrorism or internal security is very valid. Interstate coordination and these issues that we face is a clear and present lacuna, which very clearly our next speaker would be able to address very clearly. And encouraging, and I something that doesn't need any great emphasis is that intelligence is the key to breaking up any terror operations, and global support, and the final, which is very important. But the issue about the UN comprehensive agreement on terrorism is, the sad part about terrorism is that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and there's no way we can ever reach a consensus on what terrorism has been. In fact, there's no consensus at the United Nations level to understand what terrorism is. And you had mentioned this very point in your early opening remarks about how the lines between war and peace have been blurred, and that shaping perceptions is more important than anything. So today, while there might be very genuine acts of terror, we see 26/11 was an act of terror against us, and Balakot, the attack. These are all, but then these were the perception matters. So you had different parts of the world projecting them correctly. So I'm really grateful to you, sir. You always live up to your reputation to inspire and to also educate us, given your great and varied experience, and also your experience internationally in UN missions and other areas. I thank you, and I think the questions will come to you at the end of the session so that I can take it up together. And our next speaker is a very, very distinguished speaker who's firstly, he's a battle-hardened, commanded a battalion during Kargil, Operation Vijay, General Khandare. He's also been a military advisor in the National Security Council Secretariat, which is a very distinguished post, which is a very great and rare privilege which comes about. And then he's also been the Director General of Defense Intelligence Agency at a very important time in our history of our country. And he's also handled matters of personnel in the army as a military secretary. So he comes with a lot of experience, a lot of depth in his whatever he's going to present. And so, and having been in the National Security Council and also been the DGDIA, he's going to talk to us and enlighten us on what is the role of intelligence in counterterrorism operations. Like General Shivani had already brought out that it's very important for us to have. Without intelligence, you're like a blind man trying to fire a weapon. So I would hand over the floor to General Khandare for enlightening us. Over to General Khandare.
Thank you, Colonel Pillai, and Jai Hind to all of you. Firstly, it's an honor to be on the same stage as so many distinguished and accomplished people who are here. While I am going to talk about role of intelligence in counterterrorism, let me also cover the portion of the 2.5 front war that we always talk of. And when we say that these are the burning issues today, I would like to compliment the organizers for this webinar for choosing such a brilliant, such a topic and attracting so much of brilliance here on this forum. When you say you are the Indic Researchers Forum, so it would be quite appropriate for me to touch upon our Indic history. And that is where we must see, are we facing this 2.5 front threat for the first time in our history? Not necessarily. We've had many occasions when India has, or the Indic kingdoms have been having such threats. And at times we have been fooled into complacency, and we've seen the way Vijayanagar Empire just crumbled because of the 5 Deccan states combining together, and the Battle of Talikota, where the entire kingdom just crumbled. But then followed the generation of Shivaji and the Marathas, who learned their lessons of how to handle deftly multi-front, multi-domain threats. And then using diplomacy and intelligence, they were able to overcome the various threats, whether they were from the Mughals who were at Burhanpur, whether they were the Nizam Shahi from Ahmednagar, whether the Qutub Shahi, and whether it was the Adil Shahi. And all these they were able to handle, while there were threats which were being posed by the Portuguese as well as the English. So it's a question of retaining your composure, having a strategic thought process, having a strategic culture in the country, and ensuring that each and every citizen is involved as a stakeholder for the national security. When I give this example from history, let me take you to recent times when you see Israel as a country where each and every citizen is involved in the intelligence collaboration for the good of the country. Now, somebody may say that, look, they have a culture where conscription is the order of the day, and because of that, they ensure that they have contribution and collaboration from each and every citizen. Yes, that is true. But we are a very ancient civilization. And when we are a civilization, we know exactly what is good for us and what is bad for us. We've had over a century of, or more than 1,000 years, where we were either invaded or colonized, and we've suffered those brutal periods where we nearly lost everything. But what we definitely retained our self-esteem. And today, where we are, we can say that the Indic culture has not allowed us to fade off. And whether we had leaders, whether we had weak leaders, whether we had good leaders, we continue to remain as a civilization, and here we are. Now, today, if we are looking at a 2.5 front, and that half front is essentially the terrorism that we are talking of. But remember that this terrorism has had enough scars on us post-independence. Now, when we talk of asymmetric threats from our adversaries, it's not of recent origin, although many of the research scholars may not agree with me. But take back your mind to 1947, when the Kashmir Valley was being raided by the Lashkars. And what do you make of the Lashkars? Fine, they were supported and they were propped up by the Pakistan military. But at the same time, when you talk of Lashkars, that is the asymmetric capability which Pakistan has perfected till date. And that is the reason they have been able to create enough nuisance value and enough importance for the superpowers to remain relevant in the region. So you have terrorism as a stated policy, not couched in so many words, but definitely the intent is the terrorism as is depicted, where we've lost a prime minister, we lost an ex-prime minister, we've had a parliament attacked, we've had a Red Fort attacked, we had many religious places attacked. So you, in a sense, have an entire generation or many generations who know what exactly is has been done to us. Now, in contemporary and futuristic environment, this terrorism is not only in the physical domain. Now, terrorism is coming in the technological field, where we look at information warfare, we look at the kind of cyber warfare, and whether we call it or not, but we've all been going through this threat and this malaise of bio threat, the bio warfare. So you have enough reason to believe that this terrorism is not going to reduce, it is going to continue. So what should be our responses? The first thing is, the entire country's resolve is visible. So our country has proved it on more than one occasion, whether it was the Delhi attacks, whether it was the Bombay bomb blast, or whether it was the 26/11, wherever it was, there is a resolve in the people which has been exhibited more than once. So that is the most important thing when you need a country to stand on its feet, even if it has been punched many times from many directions. But then comes the question, then why is the country not in a position to say that every citizen is a stakeholder in the intelligence? Maybe because we've inherited a colonial system of governance, and in that we have certain structures which have been tasked to look after intelligence. So very briefly, external intelligence is looked after by RNAW. The internal intelligence is looked after by the Intelligence Bureau, and Intelligence Bureau incidentally is the oldest and was the only intelligence agency. RNAW came only after the 1962 and 65 war. And RNAW did marvelously well in 1971. Each of the service headquarters of the armed forces have their own intelligence organization. And we added something and we empowered them, and that is where Mr. Devi Prasad is here. And I know for sure the kind of excellent work that DRI did under the three director generals that I worked with. And I know the kind of value that got added to intelligence and that put Pakistan on a back foot. And more of it when Mr. Devi Prasad speaks. So there we are here looking at the various dimensions of intelligence now for various dimensions of national security. When you talk of national security, physical security is one, you definitely need intelligence. You look at the agricultural security or the food security, you need intelligence there. You have water security, you have energy security, you have the technological security, you have the information security, you name a thing, and you have that security as a part of the comprehensive national security. And that is where intelligence is required in each and every department and ministry. And if we do not have this kind of a thought process, whether it is in the government official who's just pushing one file or in a person who's heading that organization, we will generally be found lacking. As a people, we do not stumble so hard that we give up. We immediately bounce back, whether it is related to information security, cyber security, or space security, or the biosecurity. We immediately get our act together. The only problem with us has been that we've never been able to understand the dimensions of intelligence and the kind of collaborative approach that is required. Many a time, whenever there is a setback, you would have heard there was an intelligence failure. Now, it is good to sensationalize this, and the kind of media structure that we have, everyone wants information and a kind of sensationalization of news, which is most suitable for the TRP culture and for increasing the publications and the circulations of newspapers. So many a time, if the intelligence failure has been given out, the intelligence community normally will not be coming out and defending itself. It is the silent operator who will just keep operating and will not even come and negate the feeling that has been circulated. Many a time there have been intelligence failures, and people have taken corrective action, whoever was in power around that time. Like I said, 62, 65, after that RNAW came up. So that was an organizational structure. After the Kargil war, we had the Defense Intelligence Agency coming up, and we had the NTRO coming up. So what does that mean? We immediately realized that the organizational structures need to be modified or recreated. Thereafter, after a few years again, in the last about 4 years or so, we've got the Defense Cyber Agency and the Defense Space Agency, which have come up. So overall, I feel that we are very good at identifying mistakes, maybe a bit later, and we come up with organizational structures. But I have a problem here. I think what is required is not to stop at creating organizations, but to simplify processes. The processes of being able to interact within the intelligence community are still bereft with the kind of tough battles that we face. Now technology has come up. I think now lies the answer in how to integrate these intelligence agencies with the help of technology, where human intelligence, technical intelligence, and any other form of intelligence can be fused together so that the end result is synergized. And there I would like to tell you that a lot of work has happened and that is going on. And in fact, Colonel Pillai himself was there when we started doing that. And we are nearly there when we can say that we'll have a platform and we'll have the digital connect where the assessments from one agency will be shared by the other. Let me also come up here where the roots of terrorism are so widely spread that they are in the internal domain as well as from the external front as well. Now, our defense diplomacy, while it is called diplomacy, also plays some kind of a role in getting intelligence and supporting the effort of RNAW also. So there again, we all come up together and bring the best to the table, and the National Security Council Secretariat is one place where we get the intelligence, the diplomacy, the internal governance all on one particular platform and enable a decision making which is based on knowledge, not information. There is a difference between information, intelligence, and knowledge. And that is what I think the young researchers must focus on. That when you say role of intelligence in combating terrorism, it is not combating terrorism, it is actually preventing terrorism. And if we are able to prevent terrorism, the country's development takes place at a faster pace. And the stronger you get, the better you get, and you are able to deter people who would try to do mischief, whether from the external front or whether from the internal domain. Now, the internal domain is something which actually worries me most. Within the military or even in the government, we are very good at doing an external environmental scan. And I always jokingly say, because that is the easiest to do. But the moment we look at the internal scan, we are on shaky ground, because in a democracy, there are many sensitivities which intelligence agencies are unable to cross. And when they are unable to cross, they will not be able to speak about them. So the sharing also becomes that much more difficult. But I think in the years to come, we will have to be more particular about an internal scan, and role of intelligence in internal scan will have to be much more stringent, much more penetrating, and should be able to cover with the expertise in multi domains. Earlier, a human resource or a human intelligence was considered to be on the model of James Bond that you saw in the Cold War era. But that's no more valid. You need people who are technologically so advanced that they may not be in field, but they would be in the darknet, they would be on the internet, the entire digital space would be scanned. The capabilities would not necessarily come from a hunk who's a 6-footer, but maybe from a couch potato who would be doing things, and he would pass off as somebody as innocent as a small young boy in the neighborhood. But I think that is the kind of manning of intelligence organizations that we will have to do, and that is applicable for the civilian intelligence agencies as well as the military intelligence agencies, where we will have to work out different manning patterns, different protocols, different standing operating procedures, and we should be at least way ahead. Now, here I would like to tell you there is plenty of human talent in the technological field. There is tremendous amount of commitment in the human intelligence field. So there is only a need for a mature leadership and a mature citizenry who come together and ensure that the country is not put back by many years by allowing terrorism to succeed. Now, terrorism succeeds on many fronts. A diverse culture, a diverse kind of a background that our country has, and the kind of democratic setup we have can never be compared with the setup that exists in Pakistan or in China. In China, it is absolutely an iron hand which controls the entire lot of people, and the intelligence, it is available, and the counterintelligence is also ensured that nothing would leak. A similar situation exists to our west, where Pakistan also does the same thing, because is there the deep state is the Pakistan Army, ISI, and the clerics. So nothing will escape there. But in a country like India or in a country like United States of America, we have our own challenges because we've chosen the kind of government that we want, and we still want to continue with that, which necessarily means that for us, the answers or the solutions or the remedies cannot be those which are available in other countries. We will have to customize our own solutions. And that is where I always face a challenge when I talk in the open source media, how much to reveal and how much to give out. With that, I would like to stop, and I will take questions in the subsequent session. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
So as always, it's very interesting to hear you. And thank you for bringing in that bit of history that very many of us tend to forget, in, in remembering these old ancient empires that existed, these glorious empires. And, since you mentioned Vijayanagar Empire, I also would like to add one more thing that is added that led to this collapse of the empire was, we were so dependent on horses from the Arab traders.
Yes.
And, the kind of the Atmanirbhar Bharat that we have going on today is so important because no one ever became a superpower on borrowed weapons.
Yeah.
And we were dependent on these, and the Portuguese and the Arabs used to con us into buying substandard horses, and they used to make sure that we didn't know how to maintain them. And that led to the collapse of one of the most magnificent empires that we've had in the South. And thank you for bringing out this restoration. The challenge that was thrown by sheer diplomacy and operational abilities of the Maratha armies that you saw, and that is combined. It's something like what you've now brought about, what you just mentioned about the National Security Council being the an intelligence and knowledge-based organization is so correct, sir. In 1962, as well as in post 2001, and in everywhere we've seen that we've lacked intelligence and ability to act. Even in the hijacking of the aircraft, which took place from Amritsar, we let it fly off to Kathmandu, and every incident we have a post-mortem done. And so the fact that NSCS today has become that supranational means an organization that's capable of actually creating knowledge-based decisions is something very heartening to know, sir. And like you rightly said, an external security environment is the easiest to do. But when you do an internal security environment, today's sexistionists or separatists, you've seen that in Kashmir, and we've seen that happening here, where we tend to glorify. We are afraid whether it's a state government or, you tend to treat your own constituencies in a manner which they don't deserve, where you don't have. So it's really a very enlightening presentation. It's also very interesting that the listeners should actually do some research on the aspects of history, because a lot of lessons are held in what he brought out in his opening remarks about this. So I move on next to General Vinod Bhatia, who's been Director General Military Operations. It's a privilege to have you on board here, sir. And also former director of the CENJO, Center for Joint Warfare Studies, which is the think tank established by Integrated Defense Staff. It was meant to have the tri-service. And he's also a battle-hardened, seasoned warrior. He's a paratrooper. It's a fascination for any infantryman to be a paratrooper. I wanted to always have the maroon beret, but it's very few who actually get to be there, and they are really the final arm that we have. And we've seen how they performed in our. It's a matter of pride for us when you see the maroon berets march down our Rajpath and see their accomplishments. So he's also been DGMO. He's also handled a lot of humanitarian operations in Uttarakhand floods, and the one that we've seen in Sikkim earthquake. And as a paratrooper, I forgot to mention, he's also been involved in the Operation Cactus, in which we was one of our India's interesting operations, and gunport diplomacy that we can call. In those days, for some reason, India was capable of. We've seen that in Seychelles, we saw that in Mauritius, we saw that in Maldives. And it is something that is very fascinating, and General Bhatia was part of that. So I hand over the floor to General Bhatia for his session. Look forward to hearing
it, sir. Jai Hind, I'm audible. Thank you, Colonel Pillai. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Indic Researchers Forum, for this opportunity to be on the same platform with friends. General Khandare is here, General Ashok Shivani, and Admiral Shekhar Sinha, Mr. Devi Prashad. Thank you very much. I've been listening to the conversations for the last 2 days, more often not throughout. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Very, very good construct. I must also thank Yasser Arya and of course General Kocha. Thank you. The brief given to me is to detail the cross-border counter-terrorism operations and capabilities. However, before I do that, I would like to cover 2 aspects which have been covered earlier, but in a different perspective. When you talk of a 2.5 front war, and I heard more than a couple of speakers say that we'll never go to war. I retired about nearly 8 years ago, and when I retired and I went to this circles where everyone talks and very few listen. So I was told always, General Sahab, kya baat karte ho? Ladai to hogi nahi. We'll never go to war. I said, yeah, I agree with you. Why should we go to war? Unfortunately, it is not understood that the militaries are not meant to fight wars. They're meant to ensure peace. There's a difference between the two. we have to look at the national aims. What's the national aim? National aim is to transform India to a modern, prosperous, secure nation. It is secure what we're talking about. We need security. And when we talk about security, and John Khandare is here, talks of comprehensive national security. Right? What's our aim? Long-term peace, stability, and development. Now, this is an egg and chicken situation. Without peace and stability, you cannot have economic development. And as we all know, the Northeast and Jammu and Kashmir, without development, you can't have peace and stability. So you got to have a balance between everything. I heard, some of the speakers say, no, war will never, war. Oh, definitely, war is not an option. War is the last resort. And it is, in the last 8 years, we've been near a war situation 4 times. First, post-Uri, escalation was possible and we were prepared. Second time, during what we generally now call Doklam, which is actually Dolam, 2017, when the Chinese came in and they threatened to build a road up to Jamphari Ridge, which overlooks the Siliguri corridor, the 22-kilometer long corridor, which connects 8.5 states, 5 crore people. The third time was, of course, in February 2019, 3 years ago, after the Pulwama and the punitive operations in Jabba Top. I don't call it Balapur, it's Jabba Top. There's a difference between the two. And the fourth time, of course, in May, June 2020, Galwan. It could have escalated. It could have spiraled out of control. But why did it not spiral? That's a key question. Because we are prepared. So when you talk of operational preparedness, when you talk of operational readiness, it is for ensuring peace. It is not for war fighting alone. It's for ensuring peace. And it's an old कहावत, अगर हम कमजोर होंगे तो हमारे पे लड़ाई होगी, अगर हम कमजोर नहीं होंगे तो लड़ाई नहीं होगी. So we have to make sure that we are prepared for war, we are operationally prepared, we are operationally ready to ensure peace and not to fight wars. So that is where I would like to differ from earlier speakers who have said that war is not an option, war will not happen, war will not happen. We cannot say with guarantee. The world is changing. The wars can take place, and escalation control is not always in our hands. Things do spiral out. Having said that, let me come to the brief given, which is cross-border counter-terrorism operation capabilities. As we all know, India shares land borders of 15,106.7 kilometers with 7 nations. Right? China 3,400 kilometers. China has been supporting insurgencies in the Northeast way back. I don't know whether they support it now or not. I'm not too current. But they have the capability to support it because networks exist. It's the networks that matter. It is not what they do that matter. It's the intent can change. The capabilities are there. Then, of course, we have Pakistan. We share actual ground position line of 121 kilometers, line of control of 771 kilometers, and the borders of 3,323 kilometers. A perpetual mischievous adversary. It doesn't matter whether Pakistan loses or gains, but it matters to Pakistan when India loses. So that is the difference. It wants to hurt India, mischievous Pakistan. We also share borders with Nepal, 1751 kilometers, and we have the Maoist issue where the Maoists have been going across and coming back. Bhutan, again, 699 kilometers. We had, and I'll cover that later also, some of our groups, ULFA and DFP especially, who have had camps earlier in southern Bhutan. Bangladesh, 4,996 kilometers, the longest borders we have. And Bangladesh, presently we have a friendly government, but there have been many years when Bangladesh was perpetually harboring, supporting our insurgent groups in the Northeast. It's a very dangerous situation. And also coming to Myanmar. Now, Myanmar, we share 1643 kilometers of borders, and there are numerous groups as been covered in the earlier sessions. Manipur, Nagaland, and they have their bases across, the camps across, and they operate from there. Of course, the 7th country will share borders of Afghanistan, and it's 6 kilometers. That is not directly affected us. So let me see what is cross-border. When we talk of cross-border operations, what are cross-border operations? We should divide into cross-border and cross-LC. Because when in Pakistan it's cross-LC operations and not cross-border operations, let me put it in perspective, because that is Pakistan occupied Kashmir, that's our territory. And when Uri happened and Pakistan said that no operations have been conducted on the soil of Pakistan, they were absolutely right. We did not conduct operations on Pakistan. We conducted operations on our own soil, Indian soil, but the cross LC operations. Right? When I talk of cross-border operations, I would divide them into three: tactical, operational, and strategic. Most of the time, we've been doing tactical and operational cross-border cross-LC operations. But given the present situation, even tactical cross-border cross-LC operations can have strategic implications. And I know at least two of us present on this platform who have planned and executed cross-LC operations, cross-border operations. I know the Kalpile, you've been taking part in some of the cross-border operations, are not along the Indo-Myanmar border, but yes, it is not. It is earlier days. It was not uncommon. I would not say it's common, but it's not uncommon to have cross-LC operations or cross-border operations, especially in Myanmar and Pakistan. It's not uncommon. Of course, things have changed after that. Let me first take the more interesting Myanmar border. Myanmar has got numerous insurgent camps, as we all know. On either side of the Indo-Myanmar border, there are about 300,000 people with ethnic similarities, with tribal loyalties, who reside on either side of the border. There are about 200 crossing points, formal and informal, with a free move regime of 16 kilometers. And it is very porous. The complete border is very porous, jungle terrain. Anyone can come and anyone can go. Actually, borders are divided people. The borders are artificial, but they have divided people. They are borders, all right. We've had many of our thinkers say that we should fence the border. I don't think that's an answer, not around the Myanmar border. But there have been many this thing that we should create BOPs that fence the borders. Fences are only an hindrance. It is not it doesn't stop people from crossing over. And so we have numerous Indian insurgent groups who have actually taken not shelter, I would say, who have camps out there, because on the western borders in Myanmar, the Twoanda doesn't really, have the say as it would like to. They have the Western Command, and that has been there. But all the same, they do not have that sort of administrative control which they would like to, and hence they have a free run. It is also a commercial enterprise. The Northeast insurgencies, if I may say so today, are an industry. It's a commercial enterprise. It is no longer the insurgency which we saw earlier. And one good thing I would like to bring out here is India was the third nation to resolve an insurgency. First being, of course, the British in Malaya. Second was the French in Algiers. And third was India in Mizoram. The Mizoram insurgency was resolved on 15th August 1985. It was a proper resolution at the political level, held by the military, which created the environment for resolution. So when the Northeast insurgency covered it, all was being said. Today, I think Northeast insurgencies or terrorism Northeast is subcritical. It is in the law and order domain, not in the public order domain. If you look at the numbers, it is in single-digit violence levels. And I think there has to be a political will to resolve it. In 2015 June, the NSCN Accord was signed, the Naga Accord. We really do not know the details. It's not been implemented as yet. Now, over the years, a number of cross-border operations have been planned and executed in Indian Myanmar. Some of them at the tactical level with little depth, some at the operational level, and some at the strategic level also. I remember in November of 1984, the NSCN had ambushed the Western Army Commander of the Twoanda, and thereafter, with their on their assistance, we were prepared to go in to destroy the NSCN camps, both the GHQ and the other camps. It did not come about, but I was part of the planning and the training processes. So it did not come about, but there were a number of occasions where we've done. But the last one was in 2015 June, after the ambush on Dogras, where we lost 15 of our soldiers made the supreme sacrifice, and we had 21 para SF going across and destroying NSCN camp. So that was an extent operation, and that I would say was a strategic level, because it was done which had an impact, and actually, when we talk about strategy, it is the impact that matters, and that had an impact. And I do not know whether, I'm not too sure. I was not in service that time, but I would like to say that it would have been done by the connivance of the Myanmar army and the Myanmar government at that point of time. So along the Myanmar border, I think we have the capability when we talk about capabilities, to conduct cross-border operations fairly deep, because when we do the cross-border operations, we make sure that there's no collateral damage. That is something which didn't happen even in the June 2015 operation and the earlier operations also. Collateral damage is not there. Collateral damage is really not acceptable because these camps are removed from the villages, so it is possible to hit them, and we have the capabilities both by foot insertion and including aerial insertion by helicopters if need be. And we have the support at times of the Myanmar army, which is deployed on the west. Bangladesh, fortunately, we have a friendly government. Bangladesh is a country we have fenced from all sides, but that does not prevent either migration or smuggling in totality, because fence is just an obstacle, like we have in the LC. But Bangladesh is mostly fenced, but it has number of rivers, number of channels from which even cattle can be crossed over and can go. And we have not, because of the friendly government, we have not been actually conducting any cross-border operations with Bangladesh. Been friendly for the last now 9 years now. I think 2014 January, when the present government was re-elected. But we do have earlier instances of carrying out Operation the Chittagong Tracts when the major insurgents were there. Things have changed now, and we don't need to do that. Bhutan. Bhutan is the only country in our neighborhood which has actually taken action against the Indian insurgent groups in its territory. That was 17 December 2003, when Operation All Clear was carried out by the Royal Bhutanese Army. There were camps of the NDFB and the ULFA in southern Bhutan. And on 17th December, which happens with the Bhutan Day also, they were the Bhutanese army. They attacked these camps and then they pushed them back into our territory, and we were deployed on the borders. And when they came, when they tried to cross over to Indian territory, we were there to receive them. And that is, I think, a big blow to the insurgencies, the Bodo insurgency and the Assam insurgency. And we find that the things have changed over the years because of that particular operation, and where Bhutan has now ensured thereafter that they do not let the ULFA and the NDFB have sanctuaries or camps on southern Bhutan on their side. So that has helped us again. We in earlier occasions we have crossed over. These are very very easy to cross over. The international border is there, but when you are doing a pursuit operations, they tend to go across to the other countries, and we have crossed over at various occasions. Let me say that, and but that is more of pursuit operations, and we have carried out raids along some of their known camps also, but not after 2003 because the Bhutanese do not allow them any leeway to establish camps there. Nepal, of course, the Maoist insurgency, we do there. The intelligence agencies are very good. And now let me come to the most interesting one, which is Pakistan. Pakistan has been a challenge, Pakistan adversary, mischievous. It's carried out terrorism, insurgencies, militancy, whatever you call it, with impunity and perpetuity, starting from December of 1989. And they have supported terrorism, they have sponsored terrorism, they have engineered terrorism, and they have perpetuated attacks in India, not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but all over. And most of these attacks, if you find the major attacks and high visibility attacks, high profile attacks, have either mostly proceeded at diplomatic talks. So there is a deep state within Pakistan which does not want the India-Pakistan relations to improve. We had a fairly good run up to 2008, 26/11, when the composite dialogue was going on. But that was not acceptable with that. Even if you look beyond that, if you look at 99 also, when Mr. Vajpayee went to the bus to Lahore, we had Kargil. When he came to Agra in July 2001, we had thereafter in December, we had the Parliament attack, which was not acceptable. And then if you go on and on, even after Pathankot, it was preceded by, after a week of Mr. Modi's visit to Lahore. In the UFA meeting, the Gurdaspur attack took place after 7 days. So there is something which is there. And cross LC raids have taken place. General Khandare is here. There was a chap named Elias Kashmiri. I wonder if you heard of him. In February of 2000, he did, they carry out the raids, what they call the BAT action, and they have the disposable committee in terms of terrorists. And the BAT action is being supported by them and with the SSG. And General Khandare, please correct me and you can talk about it later, when you raided after the Elias Kashmiri's raid on Nowshera. And that was an excellent raid, I think, planned and executed by General Khandare as the CO. His unit did it. An excellent raid. So we've been doing that. It's not that we've not been doing it, but things have changed ever since with the media hype, and the dynamics have changed. When you talk of Pakistan, of course, all of you would have heard about the Uri raids. If not heard of, but if not known it totally, you've seen the move, which is quite okay. So, what did that actually imply? I will take a minute out there, because that is something at the strategic level. That is the first time India demonstrated a political military will. Earlier also, we have done raids. Even I've been involved in that, but these were at the tactical operational levels, not at the strategic level. But post-Uri was the strategic level, where we send a straight signal to Pakistan and the world that our strategic patience around. We demonstrate strategic resolve. We also demonstrate strategic restraint when we hit only the launch pads. These are punitive and preemptive operations. Both punitive after Uri, preemptive because there were terrorists waiting to infiltrate on our side. So then both punitive and preemptive operations. What they do? I'm given to understand they are maybe wrong by there. There were 7 targets, 7 teams, 7 hours to go and hit at the camps and come back. Pakistan not expecting it. They were not expecting it at all. And that was something which I think which took Pakistan a surprise. And they denied the attacks having taken place, but the world knew, everyone knew that we had done it. And here we demonstrated a will of raising the cost of Pakistan. Pakistan proxy war is a low cost, high effect war. We have to make it a high cost, low effect war. So that thing has to change. Pakistan has to bear the cost. Otherwise, in perpetuity, Pakistan will continue to spread terror across in our country. And after Uri, if you find, there was the terrorism actually came down. Other than Kashmir, there were no terrorist attacks anywhere. The next happened in 2018 in Jammu. And I recollect having, I was taking a talk and addressing on counterterrorism operations in NSG. And it was 14th of February, around 10 o'clock, I was saying that, there will be no major high-profile terror attack since Uri surgical strikes, right? And on 14th of February, we had Pulwama. So after that, again, Pulwama, we used air for the first time, and we used air in a terrorist training camp called Jabba Top, hitting at them. Unfortunately, I think let's be honest about it, in the Jabba Top strikes, we won the battle, but we lost the war. We lost the war of perception, the lost information war. Because suddenly it became Balakot. No, Balakot is 20 kilometers away. When you talk of plus minus a few meters of precision, then it is Jabba. So with Pakistan, what are we looking at? Pakistan, we're looking at cross-border operations as part of a counter-terrorism strategy. Cross-LC operations part of a counter-terrorism strategy. There were 38 odd camps they had. Some of them were active, some of them non-active. But they have the network and they have the infrastructure in these camps. So we should look at the 3P strategy of Pakistan. We're going to change Pakistan's behavior. How do we change Pakistan's behavior? By hitting at the Pakistani army, which relevance of the Pakistani army is anti-India, its political relevance, its economic relevance, and domestic relevance. So we'll have to raise the cost of the Pakistani army. How you do that is by the 3P strategy, which is proactive, punitive, and preemptive operations. So cross LC operations, cross-border operations in Pakistan. I say cross-border, I mean in Pakistan. Right? They become a very important ingredient of our strategy to ensure peace not only in Jammu and Kashmir, but in India. If you look at after February 2019, I hope I don't go wrong again, I don't have a black tongue, we had no high-profile terror attacks or any terror attacks anywhere in India. Right? So because Pakistan and the nuclear rhetoric, it's a nuclear armed nation, the nuclear rhetoric, it used to talk about nuclear rhetoric and function and bleed India with 1,000 cuts at the low intensity conflict. A very smart strategy. Pakistan is smart. There's no doubt about it. Pakistan is very smart strategy, very smart. And we'll have to deal with Pakistan as it is. So the battle of perceptions also matter. And now that we have demonstrated that we can do that, I think we have really put Pakistan on the back foot. Pakistan knows that they cannot cross our red lines. I think I'm running out of time, but for that, we do need capabilities with Pakistan. We need real-time intelligence, and the former DGDIS here is the intelligence aspects. We need real-time intelligence because intelligence is very important. Anything? Okay. We need to exploit technologies. And we need to coordinate between multiple agencies. There are multiple agencies and we need coordination, we need structures that was brought over by Shivani. So these are some of the things. Just a last word. I hope I have a minute. Yes, I do have. The global terror index was covered. India lost number 8. Now, the Western world, I don't know how they always put us down by manipulating statistics and figures. When it suits them, they'll go to percentages. When you talk of economy, they'll say percentages. Right? Today, if we talk of PPP terms, India is the third largest economy in the world, $8.69 billion, $8 trillion. Right? But then they'll not talk about that. Okay. But when they talk of global terror index, they put India after Pakistan number 8 because they talk in absolute numbers, not in percentages. We're a big country, and we really done well. If you look at the numbers in Jammu and Kashmir, also post 5th of August 2019, you'll find the violence levels are not subcritical, I'll say, but they're much lower, much lower. They'll always talk of recruitment. They will not talk of the number of Kashmiris who come for recruitment into the security forces, the police, the army. They come in thousands. So that no one will talk about. So we have this belief in all these great strategists and academicians and the media, the New York Times and others, when they talk of India, we are a risen country, we're a responsible, resilient country, nation. We're a global leader now, and we need to assert ourselves. We should not take, like this Hyundai Pakistan giving this treat. I see no reason why the Indo factory should not have its strikes all over for the next 1 month, 1.5 months. That's how we should do it. We have to play smart. And I'm saying it openly. Why should someone go into internal affairs? There's no reason. And today we'll have to assert ourselves. And that is where say, if you want to ensure peace, you have to start asserting ourselves. We have to project and protect our national interests and our national assets. And I'll end out there, cross-border operations are an integral part of our counter-terrorism strategy right now, both punitive and preemptive operations and proactive operations. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much for this very detailed presentation, sir. I think you feel very good, especially coming from somebody like you who's actually taken part in this out of area contingency in your early years. And to know that our country has taken responses adequate and have actually matured once again to be able to hit the enemy where it hurts, and coming through the entire stretch of, you've taken us through the entire land borders of our country in Myanmar, made us understand how difficult it was with this number of crossing points and kind of strike that took place post the attack on the Dogra regiment ambush. Dogra battalion's ambush, and then Pulwama, how it altered our, capability, and how we lost the war of narrative, which I really agree with you. I was in the International Red Cross in Jordan at that time. And I remember the matter was, we lost it, even though they took us a month for them to take there, it was still denied, and our pilot being shot down was we really lost the narrative there. But your fact that you also brought out about this, how we've actually succeeded in resolving insurgencies, and how great a role the Indian Armed Forces, Army particularly, has played in restoring popular government and restoring democracy. One of the strengths of our country's policy is that we would rather not see our people killed, and the armed forces have taken a lot of flack and a lot of casualties on our own side, because we would try to get the public to see the advantages of working within the existing systems, then uproot the so that's one of the strengths that we have in our country, which has been our policy, and our armed forces has walked in step with this. We've always delivered our capabilities in terms of in delivering the missions that these countries have. Even countries like America have failed in their cross-border strikes. So something that we've had is it's very creditable. But we definitely lose the war on narrative. Even in the corona crisis, a country that is 1/6 or 1/7 of the world's population, the kind of response that we have shown, the ability that we have shown from a zero PP to zero mass, and to the kind of being a supplier to the world, creating and delivering. But yet you find, despite, like you very correctly pointed out about the percentages where it suits them and numbers where it suits. So those showed the numbers, even though percentage-wise we were amongst the lowest in corona. So, these are issues that we can actually take into mind, and these are issues which you've even now we are seeing 7 girls asking about a hijab, and you have the whole country talking about it, which is rather disgraceful. Like, I don't know how can that take center stage, and I think we have this media to blame, for media and our politicians, the fifth arm. And so we've got to, I'm really grateful for this lovely detailed presentation. Now I move on to Admiral Shekhar Sinha, who's again a very distinguished warrior, who's seen, first of all, is a naval aviator. It's a matter of, it's one of the most difficult things is, flying planes itself is difficult, but to be able to land a aircraft in a moving thing in the sea is, I think you need to give it to them, that these are the best of the best, flyers, to be able to be a naval aviator. He's been Mane? Hello, did I lost you for a while? I'm sorry. He was the CISC, Chief of Integrated Defense Staff, and before he went on to Western Command, which is our most important naval command, which is so he would be now talking to us about our maritime concerns that we have, in this. We are aware that our entire history of our country changed with the arrival of a few shipmen. Vasco da Gama came with his small little fleet of 12 ships, and it changed our entire course of history, till we've actually turned into a very different society from 1498 since the arrival. And this, we've seen that happen now post 26/11, where 10 little boys came hardly trained. They came across, and so Admiral Shekhar Sinha is very well placed to enlighten us on our maritime boundaries. We share them with Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and other areas also. So, and this is something, and any country, I really believe that any country that has a strong navy is a country that is whose time has come, because we focused. Even though I'm a soldier, an army man, I realize the power of the navy, which has and you see in modern history, even in ancient history, the Cholas have played a great role in establishing the Southeast Asian the kingdoms that are there. It's all because of a strong navy, and the Britons ruled the world because of a strong navy. And I hand over to Admiral Sinha for his the next 20-25 minutes.
Thank you, Colonel Pillai, Chair, and thank you, Yashi, for inviting me here. It's really great to see all my good friends here on the panel and in the audience, and being part of them. Off late, I have not been keeping too well because of COVID, but I said, no, this is an important subject that I must speak. Let me just begin very quickly to say that, firstly, Colonel Pillai, how much time do I have?
So you can take about 25 to 30 minutes.
Oh,
You will.
fair. Oh,
It's a pleasure.
so
The Navy is always inspiration to hear.
gets the gravy. Thank you. I'll start straight away to say that, I've been told to speak on the coastal and maritime security. Let me say that there is, coastal security and maritime security are in continuum of the same security. Because we don't have a line of actual control, we don't have a line of control, we don't have an IB. At sea, it is open to the whole world. It's for global common. All that happens is that in the territorial water, which is 12 nautical miles, we we only exercise our IPC and CRPC up to that distance. But having said that, then what is our commitment? Why are we so worried about going beyond 12 miles and doing this maritime security? 2 incidents or 3 incidents, I will just sort of make a very broad mention. One is that the container ship was detained and caught by us many years ago, where the container was carrying an Al-Qaeda group of about 7 people, along with the other containers which were traveling from Gulf to the eastern part of the world. And they're living quite happily in an air-conditioned container. The second one is we caught hold of a North Korean consignment ship, which had all the, the components of nuclear warhead manufacturing or the, centrifuges, etc., at going to Pakistan. And we happened to catch them between Goa and, Gujarat, long back. I think I'm talking about 2004. And it was arrested, detained, and of course, we didn't return that ship. What we call is we arrested the ship. The third one, and the most painful, was the Mumbai terror attack. And no maritime force can absolve itself, irrespective of the fact that, there was no rule, there was no coastal security sort of act, all taken into account, but the maritime forces they had egg on their face. There is no doubt about that. So these are, and some people say that, piracy, terrorism, drug trafficking, narcotics, these are all non-traditional threats. I say that there is nothing non-traditional about it. They're all traditional threats. I mean, they're happening every day. What is non-traditional? 24 hours, every day, 24/7, round the clock. So I look at it as everything as a one threat, and I don't think there is any non-traditional and traditional threat. So just give me a second. Sorry.
Very interesting point brought about the containers.
Yeah, not many people know, because one didn't want to make too much of noise, but of course the people who are required to know, they know about it. When you talk about, I just want to differentiate the perception. For us, it is, as I said, it's a continuum of the same medium. When you say coastal security, you immediately look at peninsular India. You look at like this, and okay, this is what we're looking at, a few miles here and there, right up to coast of Sri Lanka, and maybe to the east coast. We even forget many times that our east coast is actually at Andaman Nicobar. It is not from the east coast where what you see Visakhapatnam, Tamil Nadu and all that. No, it is not. In fact, even in UPSC examination, when I ask that what is the limit of our east coast, people talk about Tamil Nadu. People coming for civil service examination. So one has to remind them that please look at the map and see where does India's border lie. India's border lies at the east coast of Andaman Nicobar Island. So we tend to forget that. So that is what the coastal security sort of construct that gives you a picture. But when you speak of maritime security, then you look at the map very differently. You immediately start seeing a much bigger map. Oh, India is here. The sea is all over. On the western side, we are looking at the Arabian Gulf. We are looking at the Africa east coast. On the eastern side, we are looking at Bangladesh. You have Myanmar. You have Colonel Pillai mentioned, that Thailand. You have Malaysia. You have Indonesia. These are all part of our east coast. Because if you start a ship or a boat from Mumbai or Vizag, and you continue going eastwards or westwards, you will not meet anybody for another 1500 kilometers. So they are our maritime neighbors. That's the first landfall you will make are all in the foreign country. They're not Indian. And therefore, at least in the Western Command, I said, I always said that I have 24 neighbors on the Western side. So people used to get surprised, how 24 neighbors? Then I would quickly walk to the map, to the Japanese naval chief, and I would show him that these are the 24 neighbors. And he would say, sure. You know, he accepted. He said, we never looked at this in that manner. So these are the three things that I have. As far as as I said, these all threats are, for me, they're all traditional threats. These are smaller ones. Piracy, yes, we have handled. We have virtually contained the piracy in the Gulf of Aden. We haven't ventured out into South China Sea. We haven't ventured into the Gulf of, the Singapore Strait. We haven't gone to Gulf of Guinea, where now the piracy has become very high. But terrorism, I gave you an example of Al Qaeda, and touch wood, as General Bhatia said, that I hope that I don't have a black time. We haven't had after 26/11. Nobody has been allowed to enter the Indian sort of maritime interest zone. So which is I would say that we have improved. We cannot be 100%. It's a huge area if you just think about the map. Why do I say that it is continuum? Somebody who has to come to Mumbai or any East Coast or West Coast, it has to travel through sea for a fairly long time. And he may take a coastal route, or he may come from beyond. And fortunately for us, people can't travel very fast over sea. It takes time. So what you do is that you keep the entire sea area under surveillance at 24/7. How do you do that? You have our satellites. You have GSAT-7, which is a completely a naval satellite. Then you have 2+2 arrangement with 4 countries in the Quad. Then you have our own ships, submarines, and aircraft deployed on what is called a 24/7 mission-based deployment. They are at the 7 most important choke points of the Indian Ocean, and it has stressed the Navy all right. But now we have a very credible maritime domain awareness network. All of them, through the satellite network, they feed into the central computer or the central, shall I say, network, the Indian Ocean Fusion Center, which is in Gurugram, and it has repeaters in Bombay, Mumbai, Visakhapatnam, Andaman Nicobar, and Kochi. So all these command headquarters, the maritime operations centers, they are also the coastal security centers. All the commanders-in-chief, they are coastal security commanders-in-chief as well of the Western Seaboard and Eastern Seaboard and the Southern Indian Ocean. So that has given us, it's not that we are close, no, we are open. We want more and more people to join. And I think if I've got the numbers right, 28 countries are already part of this. And there are liaison officers from 6 countries right now, including the US, the UK, the France. They're all here in Gurugram as looking at all this area at all the time. And with many of them, we share. In fact, all 28 we share. But there are some, shall I say it is only for white shipping, because the gray shipping, meaning that the combat ships, those data are difficult to get. And that is only being shared with these 4 countries with whom we have this 2+2 arrangement. And therefore, this Lemoa, Comcasa, Beka, one was wondering as to why it has happened. Army will come, Air Force will come. No, it's not so much. It's not so much to do with this. It was mainly to do with all our maritime cooperation, really. If push comes to shove. That's why late Manohar Parrikar didn't have any hesitation in saying that it will be on case-to-case basis. When they say case-to-case, it meant for the Army and the Air Force. You can't just come from outside and sit in our Army, our armed forces will not like to see all this happening. But because the sea areas are vast, the maritime cooperation becomes a very fundamental, shall I say, backbone of ensuring security in this very large area. Now, a lot of people tell me, what are we securing? हम कर क्या रहे हैं? हम आखिर secure क्या कर रहे हैं? So we are securing the sea lanes of communication of our interest, number 1, and then to the interest of the global commons. As you know that, we are going to hit 5 trillion economy by 2025, and that is the sort of aim of the government. Prime Minister Modi has made this statement a number of times, and that will happen. The trade through sea. We don't have very good neighbors. We don't have very much land trade. If you look at it, you tell me which countries do you do big trade with on the land? None, except for Bangladesh now, and hopefully, to Southeast Asia later. So all your trade, because, this LAC, LOC, China, Pakistan, it has limited our expansion of thinking in the northern, western, and eastern areas. And therefore, we have not prospered because all our attention has been there. It has to be there, there is no doubt. But you must also think about the prosperity of people. So we are protecting the economy by expanding our area of interest, expanding our area of security in the maritime domain. And therefore, why I'm just getting down to very basic as to what are we doing, why are we doing. And as Colonel Pillai said, that a lot of attention being paid to the Navy, and mainly because of the intention of any government is to have prosperity of their people and protect their interest. While we have a very strong army and the Air Force who are there on the border. In fact, while I was this risk, a lot of meeting in COSC, whenever anybody said that we will have a short war, and they would go and brief the minister, I used to oppose this. I said, as an army boss, as an army commander, as an Air Force commander, never ever say this. And I totally agree with General Bhatia. Vinod was there at the DGMO at that time, and I know that he held the same view. I said, sorry, please, if you start saying, they will tell you, तो तुमको जितना asset दिया है, that is good enough for 15 days. क्या हल्ला मचा रहे हो? क्यों पैसे चाहिए तुमको? And how right we both were at that time. The chiefs did not like it. How right we were. Now, do you see a war-like situation? Do you see for more than last 2 years? Isn't that war? And very rightly, right in the beginning, our keynote speaker said that there is so much of blurred line between war and peace. So we are in a very uneasy peace right now, and it will remain like this. So you are in a war-like situation. So has it been a short war? I'm sorry, it has been the long, long war. And I think that is where all the resources are getting drained out. And rightly so, because we cannot afford to lose an inch. Whatever we have lost, that is bad enough. And of course, the Chinese have got a lesson, both in Doklam and now in Galwan. So that much for the government has been very keen to so-called sea blindness. Last 7 years, what we have seen, me only as a sort of watcher from outside, because I retired about 8 years back. But what I see the government sort of approach to maritime has been extremely good. You look at Act East policy, you look at extended neighborhood, you look at Sagar, you look at Sagarmala, and the Prime Minister means business in all of this. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that it may not appear to you, but there is so much happening in this field that you will not be able to imagine. And because it is with the countries which are Indian Ocean littorals, and you see that how much is China's influence on our neighborhood, which is a security concern, obviously. The Chinese have this habit of, the salami slicing they do on the land. They are doing the same thing in South China Sea. They might just do the same thing in Indian Ocean. And India is not their best of friend. So the Navy has been assuring the government that push comes to shove. If the pressure on the land water becomes too much, let's start harassing the Chinese trade over the Indian Ocean. Don't shoot it down, but harass. China needs about 28 very large crude carriers every day to reach its port, to run its country and run its armed forces. And all 28 pass through Indian Ocean, either from Southern Indian Ocean or Gulf. China's 80% of oil, gentlemen, it traverses on this, and we have a big handle. Even if you delay them by harassing, visit and board and search, which the warships are permitted, you do that to 10 of them, they will not reach in time. That itself will begin to show after 3-4 days. So I think that, we have a great handle in our maritime domain. And therefore, the maritime security becomes important. And I fully agree with General Bhatia again, where he says that armies make peace. I would say armed forces make peace. The Navy is a force in being. Navy is a force in being, meaning that I am here. If you finger me, I'll bite you back. And therefore, I must be armed at all times. In the Western Naval Command, every ship, every submarine, and every aircraft which is deployed, they are fully armed to their warlords. All the time. I'm talking about starting from many years ago. Because it's a live area for us. You know how Pakistan border is live for you. And we have to be in support of the army operation. That's the way to take the pressure of the army on the border, that you divert. You see that the attention is diverted to further westwards on the Makran coast. Gwadar, Jiwani, all those are vulnerable areas, or Mara. And therefore, I think that, we have a great sort of, not that I'm talking through my hat, there are bigger plans, they're already in place. And everything did not be in public domain. And when push comes to shove, you will find, how do you think in 1971, everything started happening together? Border, air attack at Karachi, these are not unplanned. These are all planned. There are Chiefs of Staff Committee targets given to everybody. At what stage will it be activated? They're all there. So I would say that in last 7-8 years, maritime security has become a very important part of our foreign policy. The former Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale, while he was addressing a press conference just before he superannuated, they asked him, now what is the big change you have seen with the government? He said that maritime security has become a foreign policy priority, which wasn't there in India. You look at any bilateral agreement, any country, you will find maritime security will be very much part of all this. Why? Because one country alone cannot do it. The Chief of Naval Operations at that time, Mike Mullen, in 2007-8, he had come to India and he was on board the Virat. I was hosting him as the fleet commander, and he made a mention that we need 1,000 ship world navy. He was misquoted that the US wants 1,000 ship navy. He said no. And he quoted that, I spoke to so-and-so and I had mentioned worldwide we require 1,000 ship navy. By the way, only now probably we are touching 1,000 worldwide, which includes China. If you take China out, we are nowhere near 1,000 ships. So this is and it's not offhand. There's been study done in the RAND Corporation, and every area has been identified. So I think that, we need to look at maritime security as it's a challenge, it's an opportunity, and the East Coast has a different challenge, Bay of Bengal, because it has a strategic challenge for future. There are no skirmishes, but it is being used by China. You see their entry in Bangladesh, you see their entry in Myanmar, you see them in Malaysia, you see them in Thailand, you see them coming out of all these straits from Indonesia. The Malacca Strait, Lombok, Sunda, Ombai Watar. These are all, and there is one strait from where the Chinese nuclear submarine can actually come dived. In other places, they have to be on surface. So our cooperation with this country should be so high that nothing should go unnoticed. And I hope something is happening on that. And I saw the DCM in Indonesia has gone to Sabang port and has been doing some talk now, and that thing is going to move. And therefore you find the cooperation, naval cooperation, always an important aspect. Coming to the squad, though it is a very separate sort of subject and we can have a full discussion at some other point in time. Yes, Arya ji, I hope you are noticing that you can have a later on. So as I was mentioning Quad, only to say that right now, Quad does not seem to have any military agenda, which everybody has been saying. But just for my own recall, which I want to share with everybody, during Raisina dialogue, the Indo-Pacific Commander-in-Chief, he was asked by the press that if the Quad is not a maritime security architecture, then how are we going to prevent China from breaking rules? His immediate response was, he said, who says there's no maritime security agenda? Malabar has got same 4 people. They're exercising. They're doing very high level exercise. It's a plug and play. These four heads of state just have to say plug and play. So it becomes part of Quad. But of course, that statement was not given too much of publicity because that was not the idea to indicate that Quad. But my own gut feeling is that very much Malabar is a supplement to Quad. Now, how do we ensure the law abiding? What are these laws? If the open sea is open to everybody, then are we suggesting that anybody can do anything? No. We have this UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea, which lays down the rights and duties of every ship, every country, every flag. And therefore, if somebody is not sticking to that, you have this territorial waters, you have contiguous area, you have exclusive economic zone, etc., which is just a matter of sort of mathematics. But there are rules. But unfortunately, the Chinese have not been abiding by those rules. Particularly in South China Sea, you saw 2-3 years ago on the Scarborough Shoal judgment by the International Court of Justice, they just threw it out. They didn't accept it. We have to be very careful because they have already entered Indian Ocean, and we do not know what will they say, what will they start claiming, because they have a history book which only they know about, and only they use it when it is required. And they keep rewriting this history. Nobody else in the world knows. And therefore, we have to punish these people. Like we have taken the attitude for Pakistan, strategy of punishment, a similar strategy requires against China. Even if it is a short one, you must hurt him where you have superiority. And let's not worry about what will happen. Our armed forces are very capable and they have advantages points. I hope I am right. Former DGM was sitting here that we have our own areas of advantages. There are areas of disadvantages, but there are areas of advantages to us. So we should do that. So UNCLOS is one thing which that we don't have absolutely lawlessness. And our area of larger interest, Indo-Pacific is fine, but Indian Ocean is big enough. We do not want anybody to say we are the largest and the strongest country in the Indian Ocean littoral, the resident country. Rest, everybody is an outsider. As you know that the US is slowly been withdrawing. It had come out of Afghanistan, but again its attention is gone to now Ukraine and Russia. So there will be some involvement. But then as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, that doesn't form part of the charter that we have. And in Quad, we just had, the vaccine, then we had emerging technologies and the blockchain and supply chain issues, etc. What has not been said is the security, but in the bilateral between our foreign secretary and the Australian foreign secretary, they very openly talked about the maritime security aspect and China being the biggest. We may not say it, but there is nothing to hide. And therefore, I think that, it's a good thing that the naval planners in the past, of course, backed by the government, they are very highly Atmanirbhar. They have all our ships are built here. Weapon systems, majority of them are now being built here. Majority of them. The SAM systems are now Indo-Israeli make. The surface-to-surface missiles are Indo-Russian make. The SAM systems are something which we have to do. The guns are made in India, the long-range guns. The artillery guns have a good range of 17, 18 kilometers. So the point is that a lot is happening. A lot will happen. It's just that The moment the navies, leave the harbor, they are out of sight. But they're not out of mind of the government. They're not out of mind of the people who really in charge of the security in this country. So I think that the coming back to maritime and coastal security, how do we ensure this? So what we have done is along the coast and right up to about 200 miles, we have divided those areas into grids, just like you have grid in Kashmir or you have grid in the east. Now all these grids, the grids which are closer to the coastline, within about territorial waters or maybe contiguous zone, it is looked after by the Marine Police up to 4 miles, and beyond that by the Coast Guard. And beyond that, it is Navy's responsibility, because we have deep draft ships. We don't have shallow draft ships because it's basically a blue water Navy. We don't want to create some more assets which cost the government a lot. So there is a fair amount of synergy in the coastal security. Every coastal state has a coastal state security committee headed by the commander-in-chief, co-chaired by the chief secretary of that state. And there are a lot of stakeholders. We have the revenue intelligence, we have the customs people, we have shipping corporation. All those people are there, and they meet quite frequently. Intelligence is shared. Particularly now, I can tell you that at least in Mumbai, the Maritime Operations Center, we have all the representatives with on the radar screen, on the MDA screen, including a police sub-inspector 24/7 with a hotline with the police headquarters, so that they keep exchanging the information which is given to the central sort of picture. And then we also have indoctrination of all our fishing community all along the coast. Every 15-20 days, either the Navy or the Coast Guard go and tell them. So they have become our frontline eyes and ears. They have all been given cell phones who can contact the nearest marine police station, and they can tell them कि भाई हमारा एक boat हमने देखा है जो हमारा नहीं है. Every state has got a different color code for the fishing boat. It's not possible to go and investigate all the fishing boats. At any one given time, ladies and gentlemen, there are 50,000 boats out at sea. 50,000 at any given time. आप कितने लोगों को देखिएगा? So they have been given the automatic identification system. Earlier it was sort of mandatory only for up to 300 tons of boat, but now it has been made mandatory for less than 200, and those things are being manufactured and given to them. You have identity cards for all the fishing community. You have card readers in all the naval and coast guard ships. So things are happening. Things are happening, and they're happening quite rapidly. They're all 24/7. They are closed up, just like you're closed up on the border. For us, sea is the border, and it's very vast. If you look at it, you're looking at Gulf, you're looking at Gulf of Aden, you're looking at, Mauritius, Seychelles, you're looking at, East Coast, Indonesia, looking at all over the place. And they're all under surveillance 24/7. And I think we should take a lot of pride that, India is capable of doing all this. So I think that the maritime security, I have only brought out why it is essential. The future of the country lies there as far as the prosperity is concerned. In Navy securing the sea lanes of communication, India's economic interest. And of course, it is keeping it open for the rest of the world. So I'll put a stop here, and maybe I can take some questions later. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you for this very enlightening presentation. So it's always a pleasure to hear you, and for running us through our, firstly, it's very interesting to know that there was an air conditioner container ship. One thing that comes to my mind is, how do we actually monitor the number of thousands of containers that are going through and, prevent these kind of things? It's very fascinating. And you brought about the fact that, many aspirants don't know that our eastern seaboard extends right up to Andamans, and our, it's like the concept of what you said about how to hit China. It is because these are unsinkable aircraft carriers. If you look at it, overlooking the Mumbai, Metan, Lombok, and Sunda Straits, and where all their things go. So you really, until this Gwadar port becomes a reality, they really would have to depend on this capacity. And the Navy has, the ability to strike where it matters the most. And and it's nice to hear. In fact, when you mentioned this, the armed Navy being armed all the time, I remember this thing about INS Vindhyagiri, which had docked off, Seychelles when a coup was planned, and Operation Lal Dora, which was there, which was again in collaboration with the paratroopers, and 54 Div that was planned to help our allies in Mauritius. These are very interesting aspects of how far we can reach with the Navy. So Vindhyagiri was already at sea. We just diverted them and we maintained Seychelles. And today Seychelles continues to be an ally of India, and so does Mauritius. Now, Anirudh Jagannath was a product of the Indian diaspora that had gone there. He was a prime minister, and his deputy had challenged him, and Indira Gandhi had provided the support. So so you talked about the 1,000-ship Navy as well, which is a very interesting concept. I remember all the news that had come out at that time. And so, in our own history, we don't realize that the Chola Empire, which is one of the greatest, imperial empires that we don't talk about, they had a 1,000-ship Navy. I remember reading this very clearly that
Absolutely.
if you go to Tamil Nadu, you find inscriptions about how they launched 1,000 ships when the Sri Vijaya kingdom came about as an intermediary in between the Song dynasty and the trade that came in, and they launched 1,000 Kannis. It's called the small ships that were launched. It was capable of inflicting, and they did a regime change there in that area, and they established a government that is, which recognized the sovereignty, the power of the Cholas. So it's an interesting thing. We've always been a maritime power. And I'm so proud that the Indian Navy today, and even in 71 war, it's an unsung aspect. Two things that we don't realize in the 71 war, the Navy played a great role in the Karachi harbor strikes, of course, and where the missile boats, and then also in creating what we saw in Bangladesh. We created the naval force. A commando was created, which Bangladesh is an entirely riverine territory, and the Navy created a commando force that actually destroyed their entire logistics supply chains and destroyed them. So it's something that is unsung. And so I really thank you for this very detailed, and for also about all the other aspects about the thing you brought about. And now it brings me to the last speaker of this very interesting session. We have with us an Indian Revenue Service officer, Devi Prasad Dash, who is a very distinguished officer who's seen a lot of service. In fact, Indian Revenue Service is our lifeline, actually. Any country needs the revenue, or we can keep dreaming of all the ships that we want or the guns that we want. If the revenue is not streamed, is not there. So we owe a lot to the Indian Revenue Service, which actually owes. And Dr. Devi Prasad represents one of the finest officers that we have in this service. He's had a career of over 38 years. He's held a lot of executive and policy-making decisions, not only in India, but also internationally. He's worked in the United Nations Secretary General's panel for, where he was the chairman of the enforcement committee for the World Customs Organization. He's seen service as a customs officer. He's seen service as a police officer, a lawyer, Reserve Bank. So he's seen every aspect. He's a multi-dimensional. Now, we have a very interesting set. I hand over to Dr. Devi, Mr. Devi Prasad Das.
Thank you, Colonel Pillay. And it's been really quite enlightening hearing General Chivane, General Khandare, General Bhatia, and Admiral Sheikh Hasina. In fact, we are together with Deep Strat. And it's a real pleasure listening to all of you about the strategy. And I must thank, Indic Research Forum for giving me this opportunity to share my views today. The topic for me assigned was the laws of terrorism in India. But I would just like, with your permission, Chair Colonel Pillay, to respond to some of the questions and issues that came up prior to my assigned session. General Khandare talked about the DRI's role. I'm pretty must thank you, General Khandare, for those kind words. And we talked about various aspects about the land, of the sea, the maritime, and all that. But Indian Customs, and particularly DRI, the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, is again another silent work as an agency which is doing a lot of work for the national security, which is very little known in public domain. Unlike any other agency, it has been given the powers, almost about 50 laws, which probably there is no other agency which has been given so much. Being as a border force, because we can certainly, it's the legal power that comes is beyond the borders. So anything that happens, we have the power beyond India. And in 2019, in fact, we amended the Customs Act 62 to make India as one of the very few, probably 3 or 4 in the world, where the customs powers have been going up to the exclusive economic zone, which is 200 nautical miles. There was a talk in one of the coastal security meetings taken by the cabinet secretary. They were talking who could be given the powers. Navy said, certainly we don't do the policing work. Then the Coast Guard said, we don't have the powers of the customs beyond the particular area of territorial waters, and then the contiguous zone. Then, we came back with this amendment in a very intelligent way, which would not be violative of the UNCLOS, which Admiral Sinha was talking about. So we amended the extent of Indian customs waters going up to the EEZ. And under the Customs Act 62, the customs officers do have the powers to stop, search and seize and then inspect the vessels up to EEZ. So that's a great complementary legal enabler which help in a maritime and coastal security domain, where at the front is the Navy and the Coast Guard, and certainly with the empowerment of the customs. And most of the operations currently that we are having, they have all these 3, including police, on board the vessels, apart from the coastal surveillance which is happening and all. So this is a very good experiment which has happened post Mumbai blast, that multi-agency operations which have been happening quite often, and these officers are on board, so that depending on the assigned legal empowerment, they can take that. Another interesting thing which I just wanted on the airfield, because we have customs has taken a lot of automation, use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and data analytics has been the forte, based on which we have made huge cases of seizure. You would have heard, all of you, 3,000 kilograms of heroin at Mundra port. And there was a record seizure of mandrax, the world record, in fact, in Rajasthan. And how do you really see the cargo and the persons, which they are the two, which really bring in the real threat to the security of any country? Now, when it comes to the passengers, there are 60 crores of international passengers which are coming, barring this corona period, every day in and day out, 24 hours, all the airports which are there. How do you really know who's a terrorist, who's a criminal, who's not, who's a bona fide person? So we have implemented one of the very fine software system. It's called API PNR system. So before any international passenger lands in any of the ports, including sea ports, we have a total profile about the person, whether he's a wanted person, he's to be arrested, whether he's to be searched, or he's to be given a green channel 1. And based on that, around 8% of the international passengers are given a green channel facility. It's not because of the lack of the people, or you don't want to touch it, but the fact is all have been screened through a very sophisticated risk management system that we have, which is linked globally. That is on the passenger front. On the cargo front, again, we have lakhs and lakhs of containers coming in, 20 feet, 40 feet, day in, day out. So how do you can't open it, because when you're talking about competing economy to make it as a 5 trillion economy, your ports need to be decongested and they need to be cleared up at the earliest, so that the economy really booms, because import and export is one of the lifeline of every country. And keeping that, again, we have something called a risk management system, one of the few customs formations in the world who have, again, completely taken into automation. And we know from where it's coming, what are the goods, and who are the agents. The entire international supply chain is part of the risk management system. So, and then we do have a lot of scanners, X-ray, gamma ray, and even mobile scanners of the containers, so that we, in case of a suspected container, which we again do it through the Container Security Initiative, which is again linked to many of the customs formations, then we pick up those containers and then go for examination and try to find out if there is anything which is objectionable and all. Then, of course, we have a small fleet of about 100 vessels that we have, and which we work in tandem with other maritime forces that we have in India. But apart from that, the human int, again, it hasn't lost its relevance, what General Khandare was talking about, apart from the automation. But we do rely very largely on human int at all, also, because we have, like RAW, very few would be knowing, we have our own intelligence officers who work as customs liaison officer, as drug liaison officer, as enforcement liaison officer, and they also, double up as secretary trade in most of the missions abroad. So they are the eyes and ears, and they do share a lot of information with us. And since we have the system of something called giving cash incentive of up to 20% of the goods which are confiscated by the government, and which is absolutely tax-free from the income tax point of view, that again brings in a lot of those people who are thick into the smuggling racket, who get huge money. I know some informers have got more than 1 crore, absolutely tax-free money. So there, when it comes to crossing the border, jumping the fence and taking a risk for their own life, they do come forward and then, they help us out. And their total confidentiality is maintained, because no name, nothing except the fingerprinting and all. So again, human int plays a very important role. On the coordination side, we do have set up something like MAC. We are a member of the MAC. But at the same time, we have set up something called SCORD, Anti-Smuggling National Coordination Center. And there, about 20 agencies are part of it. And we had very interesting cases in an army on the Pakistan border, where a lot of arms and ammunition and the drugs, we did seize it, where army didn't have the intelligence. Again, we had picked that up from a dual source. We have one of the few agencies having the facility to legally empowered to intercept communications. And those communications, as you know, really feed so much of information to the agencies that makes our job very, very interesting in those critical hours and all. So we have, based on those data analytics and human int and a combination of other sources that we have made huge number of seizures of heroin coming from Pakistan, from the seaside, and we do take a lot of help from Coast Guard because of the number of vessels and the reach that they have, presence in the seas. So these are the kind of things which I thought probably it was not a mandate assigned to me, but since we are talking about the strategy of different agencies in countering and ensuring national security, I thought I would share this less known facts about DRI and the customs that we do. Thank you, General Khandare, for raising this point and giving me this opportunity to share this. Now, coming to the main topic that was assigned to me, India is one of the few countries which had experienced terrorism much before the international community took serious note of this issue. As you know, a multicultural, liberal, and democratic country like India, given its geographical situation, is particularly vulnerable to acts of terror, mostly state-sponsored and from across the borders, with statistics showing that Indians have suffered the maximum casualties at the hands of terrorists. Although terrorism is, as an offense, didn't figure in the Indian Penal Code of 1860, over the years, India has experimented with different formats of specialized anti-terror laws, and some of which are indigenous innovations, and some have been adopted in response to India's obligations under the Universal Counterterrorism Instruments and the UN resolutions. In fact, many of you would be aware, Mr. Sandhu, my colleague who was in the Interpol and also worked as a member of the UN Security Council's panel of experts. Since 1963, international community has adopted 19 universal legal instruments, and this is primarily the combat terrorism. But they are all under the auspices of the United Nations and its specialized agencies, particularly ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, IMO, International Maritime Organization, and International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. These instruments were meant to address specific types of terrorist incidents or threats, and they covered offenses related to different sectors, namely civil aviation, crimes against internationally protected persons, hostage taking, illicit use or handling of nuclear materials, acts against the safety of maritime navigation, and fixed platforms located on the continental shelf, terrorist bombings, financing of terrorism, and acts involving the criminal use or handling of chemical, biological, or radiological or nuclear materials or weapons. Additionally, the UN General Assembly and the Security Council have also adopted landmark resolutions to combat terrorism. There have also been several regional and national initiatives. India too has submitted a draft comprehensive anti-terrorism convention, which is being negotiated by the ad hoc committee established by the UN General Assembly. In fact, General Shivane mentioned about the need to have the comprehensive convention on counterterrorism, which can define what is terrorism. Unfortunately, 75 years of the UN have elapsed, but still there is no consensus among the nations on a comprehensive definition of terrorism. That's the most unfortunate part of it. However, these 19 universal international instruments, or even the Security Council Resolution 1373 of 2001, which was the most important Security Council resolution post 9/11, they use words, they never use the word terrorism or terrorist acts, because they know the moment you get into that, then the problem would start. How do you define terrorism? Because there are still a large number who feel that their freedom fighters are not terrorists. So this dichotomy, in spite of the fact that India also got independence from the colonial powers, and there was also use of violence at some point at some sectors, but India never took any of these pretexts or alibi to say whether terrorism can be justified or not. Indian, the stand has been absolutely that terrorism cannot be justified on any aspect, whether it's religion, whether it's race, whether it is freedom of the country, or anything for that matter. India has mostly adopted the universal counterterrorism instruments and enacted corresponding domestic laws to implement the same. In fact, over the years, a number of central and state laws have also been enacted or amended to deal with terrorism. The Indian Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 contain provisions relevant to terrorism cases as well, but not specifically calling it terrorist acts. Charges under the IPC have been invoked in terrorism cases even now, such as Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, whether it's Parliament attack case, or the 26/11 Mumbai attack case. India had enacted the first special anti-terror law in 1987. That is much before the 9/11 attack. And that set the tone for a new anti-terror international legal regime. I mean, that's something which is quite interesting, because the whole world got into a hyper mode post 9/11 with 1373 Security Council resolution. And then many countries who didn't have a specialized anti-terror law, they started enacting. In fact, it was legally obligated on all member states of the UN to have a counterterrorism domestic law. But India, much before, in 1987, itself had started this specialized law. Against the backdrop of Indira Gandhi's assassination in 1984, India enacted TADA in 1987 that defined a terrorist act, but not terrorism. Again, in the aftermath of 2001 Parliament attack, the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2002, known as POTA, was enacted. And after the repeal of POTA in 2004, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967 was amended to include the definition of a terrorist act. And as you know, there are other central and state laws that deal with specific public order and security situations in a localized area, such as Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958 for checking insurgency in Northeast by giving additional powers to the armed forces in areas declared as disturbed areas. These provisions were extended to Jammu and Kashmir in 1990 through the enactment of the Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act. Some states have also enacted laws to combat organized crime and militancy, such as the Maharashtra Control of Organized Crime Act 1999, which is known as MOCA, applicable in Maharashtra, but later some states like Delhi also adopted MOCA. The Karnataka Control of Organized Crime Act of 2000 and Chhattisgarh also started, called Chhattisgarh Vishesh Jan Suraksha Abhiyan 2005. Depending on the facts of individual cases, other central legislations concerning the use of arms, ammunition, and explosives that have been used in terrorism cases, provisions or of other laws such as the Arms Act 56, Explosives Act of 1884, Explosive Substances Act of 1908, or the Customs Act 62 are also invoked. Let me tell you, when you talk of the laws concerning counterterrorism, it's just not those specialized laws, it's the entire legal regime that comes to the place. In US, post 9/11, when they were taking stock of the efficacy of the legal system in 10 years since 9/11, then they found that the conviction rate wasn't very high concerning terrorism offense per se, but conviction was very high because they had taken into account the immigration violations and violations under various other laws, allied laws, and with that they were able to detain and convict people who otherwise were indulging in terrorist acts. As you know that end of the day, getting a strong evidence is a real challenge to the police and other law enforcement officers. So because of that, a multiple legal regime come to the play. For example, let me tell you, if in the Customs Act, the statement recorded by a customs officer is valid evidence in the court of law, which is not the case in case of a police officer. Any statement given before a police officer is not admissible in the court. For the first time, they wanted to bring that customs equivalence in TADA. And that, of course, they kept it as a very high level, that only statement taken before an officer of the superintendent of police would be admissible. But as you know that that's not possible, because for the SP to be involved in so many cases where the statements would be recorded. So because of that, there was misuse and abuse, and TADA was thrown out. And after that, POTA came and the similar fate. And Unlawful Activities Act was not a specialized law for that matter, but it was old act which was amended to incorporate some of the features which were less controversial from the previous legal regime, and also as part of the international obligations that India was supposed to incorporate into the domestic one. If you see, the Azmal Kasab was convicted under 9 different central acts. So that way you find that any terrorist case, it's just not one law, but IPC, that particular law, and then various other offenses which are committed by the terrorist or the terrorist organizations, or all those who are criminal, part of the criminal conspiracy. India has made a real departure from the laws of some countries, particularly US, Canada, UK, and even Australia. While these countries have stressed on the intention behind the terrorist act as the purpose of advancing a political, religious, or ideological cause, the Indian laws have avoided any such intention or purpose being incorporated to define or describe the terrorist act. The TADA, as I said, was unique in many respects. They incorporated the provision for special courts, designated courts, were set up for trying the terrorism cases, and it placed a lot of restrictions on the grant of bail on those arrested persons. Police was given enhanced powers for detention of suspects, and in the new law, in fact, there are certain offenses which are redefined, like harboring, or concealing terrorists, being a member of a terrorist gang or terrorist organization, holding of property derived as a result of terrorist acts. So these are some of the terms which were coined with better clarity, and the ambit of which was expanded. And this is how it makes a difference from the normal IPC offense. And in fact, it made confession before the police officer, as I said, admissible. It extended the possible period of detention of a suspect in police custody pending investigation. As you know that Twoanda, the constitutional validity was challenged before the Supreme Court in Kartar Singh case in 1994, but Supreme Court upheld the law. It said, yes, it's constitutionally valid, but it did say the government to provide certain safeguards to prevent possible abuse of the stringent provisions of the law. Now, in fact, it also provided that there should be a review, because there are so many complaints which were there, and the review committee looked into various such complaints, and Twoanda was allowed to lapse in 1995. After a few years, in fact, terrorist incidents, as you know, in 1999, the Indian Airlines flight IC-814 to Kandahar was hijacked. And in 2001, December 13, this parliament attack took place. And that led to the enactment of the POTA in 2002. You know, interesting thing I would like to say, because when you say whether can law prevent or combat terrorism, you see, when Twoanda came, it was Indira Gandhi's backdrop was her assassination. And after that, Twoanda was generally decried as being very harsh. But paradoxically, none of the provisions of this specialized anti-terror law, which was enacted after the assassination of his mother, the then serving Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, could be applied to the perpetrators of the killing of Rajiv Gandhi. In the Rajiv Gandhi assassination case, the Supreme Court held that it was neither a terrorist act under Section 3(1), nor the activities of the perpetrators were disruptive under Section 4 of the Twoanda Act. And this is really paradoxical, how the law can be interpreted. Later, the Administrative Reforms Commission, in fact, was very critical of the Supreme Court's interpretation of Twoanda by saying that Rajiv Gandhi's case was not a terrorist act. And again, paradoxically, Rajiv's death is celebrated as Anti-Terror Day in India. POTA, again, as you know, some of the definitions were modified to prevent some kind of abuse. The mens rea concept, which is the intention to commit, that was brought in POTA. And raising of funds for the purpose of terrorism was included in the definition. This is again one of the obligations, the financing of terrorism. And the seizure, attachment, and forfeiture of proceeds of terrorism was brought in. Interception of communication, as you know, all of you have been doing this, it's normally the Telegraph Act or the latest, the IT Act. But POTA provided in-house interception of communication facility, which later was removed and not repeated in the UAPA. And you know about the interesting case which was there concerning one of the film actors. Because of this new provision, unauthorized possession of firearms. If any person was unauthorized possession of certain arms or ammunition specified in the arms rules in a notified area, or explosive substances and lethal weapons capable of mass destruction, or biological or chemical substances of warfare in any area, whether notified or not, he would be guilty of committing a terrorist act. And this is how Sanjay got into problem. And in fact, the increased period of police custody, although you know that 167 section of CRPC normally provides for a statutory period of 60 days or 90 days, and in the normal police custody going up to maximum 15 days. But this was enhanced to 30 days and 90 days, and the court could extend, the special court could extend to 180 days. A lot of human rights activists were very critical of this enhancement, saying that quite often the innocent people could be detained without in bail and going up to 180 days. It affects their freedom and liberty. And later, of course, again, like Tada, the constitutional validity of POTA was challenged in People's Union for Civil Liberties case. And there were a lot of review committees which were set up. It would be interesting to note this. 3 such review committees found that there was no prima facie evidence against 2/3 of the accused in POTA cases pending at the time of its review. So that is the extent to which the people who are brought into the ambit of POTA by circumstances which prevailed in those areas or in those areas by those agencies. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 67, it was a kind of moderation, a kind of effort to address all the criticism which was there, the adverse observations made by the courts against abuse, and the various points raised by the human rights activities. If you see, it's a very comprehensive definition. Unlike any other country, India has not only gone beyond any threat to the individuals, but even to the property, and including the cyber and other assets. And if you permit me, I'll just read this particular one that will give a kind of idea that how comprehensive, when the entire world is not able to define terrorism, India has covered it so comprehensively. It says, whosoever with intent to threaten the unity, integrity, security, or sovereignty of India, or to strike terror in the people or any section of the people in India or in any foreign country, does any act by using bombs, dynamite, or other explosive substances, or inflammable substances, or firearms, or other lethal weapons, or poisons, or noxious gases, or other chemicals, or by any other substance, whether biological or otherwise, of a hazardous nature, in such a manner as to cause or likely to cause death of or injuries to any person or persons, or loss of or damage to or destruction of property, or disruption of any supplies or services essential to the life of the community in India or in any foreign country, or causes damage or destruction of any property or equipment used or intended to be used for the defense of India or in connection with any other purpose of the government of India, any state government, or any other agencies, or detains any person and threatens to kill or injure such person in order to compel the government of India or the government of a foreign country or any other person to do or abstain from doing any act, commits a terrorist act. This is a very, very broad, comprehensive definition, which includes India, foreign country, international organizations, individuals, assets, infrastructure, everything. So this act, in fact, took out some of the controversial thing: no special courts, no enhanced powers of investigation, and the admissibility of confessions made before police officers was removed. And in 2019, there has been an amendment to UPA. It says the government of India can identify and designate an individual as terrorist by amending UPA. Earlier, the power was limited to designating organizations, and factions could be designated as a terrorist. And this has been again challenged in the court, saying that the government has usurped more powers by designating individuals without giving them an opportunity, without giving any notice, and they could be in serious trouble. Again, as you know, there was a need to have a centralized agency in India unfortunately, CBI was the only agency which was doing at a central level, and that too with the consent of the state governments. So India came out with a specialized legislation in the wake of 26/11 Mumbai attacks, and Parliament, in fact, enacted National Investigation Agency Act 2008. And this is to provide a special investigation agency at the national level to investigate and prosecute offenses affecting the sovereignty, security, and integrity of India. And India has a very comprehensive financing of terrorism provisions in the law itself, including economic security, which is not commonly found in other countries, but India has taken that very seriously. And in fact, the counterfeiting, they have defined the high quality counterfeiting is also deemed to be raising funds for the purpose of terrorism. So from overall perspective, Indian legal regime is very robust, and Indian criminal justice system, though it takes a lot of time, but at the same time, we are cognizant of the fact of the democratic rights of everybody until it's proved everyone is given the same amount of facilities, including legal aid. You know that Kasab was also given free legal aid by the government, and all the evidence were examined by the courts in a proper perspective. So there have been many cases in which acquittal has happened, but end of the day, I feel that justice needs to be done, because in case of injustice by the judicial system, there would be many more terrorists who would be getting into it, because if one person is affected illegally and injustice done to that, then not only the family members, the community or many others would join, which would not be in the best interest of any country. So to that extent, a very fine balance needs to be maintained, which Indian legal system has between respect for human rights and enforcement for ensuring national security.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And
thank you very much. It's a very, very comprehensive presentation made by you, sir, on a very, very difficult subject. You've covered the entire gamut of what we've been actually achieved. Much of it is not known to us, and we don't realize the kind of activities that goes on behind in creating this kind of a legal regime. And the very fact that India is in the forefront in kind of combating terrorism by enacting domestic legislations, carrying out the necessary changes that you mentioned about having this customs officers and revenue service officers present in these areas, acting as intelligence officers, and these but very interesting that Rajiv Gandhi's assassination was not considered an act of terror, which is if you remember, well, if you take out a leaf from the Chanakya's directions, so it's the power of punishment alone when exercised impartially in proportion to the guilt, irrespective of whether the person is the king's son or an enemy, that protects the world and the next. And then you kind of let these legal processes go through in such long winding systems, the kind that we've seen. We're actually empowering them in many ways, and sometimes it becomes a burden on us, though we try to project a very benign image, a law-abiding. There are acts of terror that needs very clear responses, and these are something that our government should be working on. Now, we hardly have any time for taking the question, but it'll be very unfair to the audience and the speakers if I don't, quickly put through the questions that have come in. So I would like to. I'll come straight to the questions. There's one question to Admiral Sinha. What is the effect of Gwadar port going to be for India, and how can actually India offset the balance, the disadvantage that we have in Ladakh by using the Navy? I'll just, can you just quickly answer a question, probably in as short as possible, sir?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Important one and a tough one. As far as Gwadar is concerned, it is a matter of concern because the port is sitting at the mouth of Gulf of Oman, and all the entry and exit from the Gulf, which mainly consists of oil, and our friend and partner, America's Fifth Fleet, is inside the Gulf. So every submarine and every ship will be under surveillance of the Chinese. And I wouldn't be surprised that Twoanda will become the Indian Ocean Fleet for China sooner or later. How can we offset? Well, we can let them monitor. Let them monitor is fine, because China is more vulnerable than we are. As you know, that we have reduced our lifting of oil from Iran. We have increased it in South America, and we have increased it in other parts. But it cannot do away. It can be tit for tat. They take more oil than we do. So I think that there is no need to unduly get concerned. But it is a matter of we'll have to increase our surveillance and see what they are doing. Second one, how we can offset. As we said that there are two things. If there's an all-out war, then of course Navy's long-range missiles are very much there, quite capable of reaching the the Chinese border from the east coast. Number one. Secondly, to harass the shipping of the Chinese in the Indian Ocean. And I firmly believe, I just wrote a piece saying that Hu Jintao was talking about Malacca dilemma for China. Let us make it Indian Ocean dilemma and not leave it as a Malacca dilemma. So that's all I can say for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this crisp answer, sir. Very clearly put across. And I agree with you, sir. Just a matter of time, just like we came over the inhibitions to use our air power and the kind of demonstration we did in Balakot, we would actually overcome the hesitancy to use our naval power in these areas. And that will be that'll be our true arrival on the scene as a power to be reckoned with.
Yeah, just to mention that we have non-nuclear tipped missiles with fairly long range, including the cruise ones. If launched from the Bay of Bengal, it can hit the Chinese in the Tibetan Plateau. Thank you.
That's that brings me to the next question, actually, which was addressed to General Bhatia. And this is about how India loses the perception battle. Even though Americans have lost every possible intervention that they've actually entered, like whether being the latest one in Afghanistan, they've withdrawn after 20 years, after trillions of dollars, Iraq and Vietnam, and yet they're projected as an amazing power and a very the sole superpower and things like the two words to that effect. Whereas we've had an excellent track record in firstly liberating a country when the whole world turned a blind eye to the atrocities that are out in Bangladesh. We had a responsibility to protect. We've created a country, and you see the way this country has actually grown and matured into much better from a country that is there. So, and then similarly, the question is also about how can why is it that India loses the perception battle in this? That's the question, to cut it short, sir.
Thank you, Billy. Why India lose the perception battle is because I think we need to study and have structures and systems for the information war, because time, as we call it, is the essential element of national information and national power. And very recent cases, many of them, we've done exceedingly well everywhere. Even when we talk of China, the LAC, look at the amount of information war which is coming out of the public opinion, psychological warfare coming out of China, and we spread it. We are fastest finger first. Anything that comes to me, I have to just repost and repost and repost. I talked about the precision airstrikes with Jabba Top as this thing. The construct of Balakot, Uri we succeeded because Pakistan not prepared for it. And thereafter, when we won that war at Uri, he was prepared for the information war in Jabba Top. And at 5:30 in the morning, because I'm a lazy man, I get up late in the morning. That is when I got up in the morning, and I read a tweet from the DGISPR saying that India claims to have struck Balakot and all. I said, Pagal hai sala. Balakot, having commanded 25 days, Balakot is a village right across in Minder sector. So I said, why should Air Force strike Balakot, because Balakot is within small arms distance actually to talk about it. I said, kuch kara hoga. And it is only later on I realized that what he's talking about is Jabba Top, because Jabba Top we are known, because having in the army we know exactly where his camps are and all. And look at the way Jabba Top became Balakot, right? Then they did another very good thing. They called all the DS to Islamabad, and this was told me one of the DS was present there to Islamabad, and they said, "We'll fly you to Balakot, and you can see that there's nothing which is being stuck out there. There's no damage whatsoever by the Indian Air Force." And they took off at around 10 o'clock. They just took off from Islamabad and landed them back, saying the airspace is closed, right? And this told me one of the DS was present in one of the helicopters there. And thereafter, after 43 days, and the Air Force, the airspace is closed. It was only after 43 days that they take them back to Jabba Top and show them that, look, nothing has happened. So this is the battle they're talking about. And look at us. We have no systems, we have no structures, and let's look at our weaknesses. We did everything right, and then in the evening at 5 o'clock, we let's be very blunt about it. We put 3 officers for a 5 o'clock brief, call the media, and suddenly we realize 5 o'clock the Prime Minister is speaking live. So that gets postponed to 7 o'clock. Right? Now we are talking of February, 27th of February to be precise. And 27th of February is cold, 7 o'clock is night time. And these 3 officers come out there, they are lost. Honestly, they are lost. The only one who was, knowing everything was the defense PRO. And they were not involved in this thing, and they were not convincing at all. Why couldn't we fly in one of the pilots who could have come there and just given out what he had said? One of the youngsters, he had the conviction, he had carried the operation. So that is something which I think we have to do. We cannot let them take the battle of perceptions away. Talking of the US, I think you're absolutely right. The question, the US loses everywhere. Look at the US. It is not only Vietnam and Afghanistan. Look at Iraq one. The political objective that the action was to destroy Saddam Hussein. They could not succeed. They came back to Iraq too, and then they did it. And one of the operations which is not so well recorded is the operations in Grenada. So that was in 84, 85, where the Americans, they went in and they dropped 1,000 paratroopers in the university area. They took 36 hours doing it. Imagine 36 hours. And we in 1971, using Dakotas and AN-12s, we dropped 46 we dropped a battalion in 37 minutes. Okay, so that's the difference, and it is only after Grenada, where they lost 18 soldiers, paratroopers in that drop, with the very little opposition, that they came out with this, with the jointness and the Goldman-Nicholas Act and all. It is a result of that. Look at the Operation Eagle Claw. The rescue operation in Tehran, 1974 May. So they have a habit of doing all this, creating a lot of this thing, and then they attack us. They have good language in English is their mother tongue. So, and we borrow those languages, and we started we're talking about that. It's very, very easy for me to take down a Rand Corporation paper and talk about it. We should not do that. We should look at our Indian character. Look at what we have done. Have we succeeded everywhere? I think we have.
Always.
47, 48. Yeah. Just take one more minute. 47, 48, right? 48 Hyderabad. Come down to Op Vijay Goa. 62, okay. We learned our lessons there. Good, we learned our lessons there. I think China interfered by 62. Otherwise, we would not have prepared to 65. 67, Natula. 71, we divided the nation, like you rightly said. You go on Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, whatever there's, then the Uri surgical strikes, the Jabba Top strikes, look at Dolam, look at what we have done along the LAC. We have strategically surprised China and the PLA with a resolve. Galwan, had we not retaliated, Kal Santosh Wan not retaliated effectively to the Galwan attack, there were many more Galwans which had happened. Because the cost on PLA was so much, almost double, and not coming out again, that there were no more Galwans. So we have to look at our capabilities and capacities and how we do it. It's not that. We have to have a self-belief and self-esteem. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Indeed, there are a lot of other questions, but since we have to wrap up, I would now thank all of you. I thank General Khandare for his very detailed presentation, and also a lot of people in the inbox have mentioned thanking you for raising the issues about the medieval India and others. And what you, General Vinod, also said, General Bhatia said about how we try to ape the West. It's such a wrong, like we end up being a very poor version of ourselves. We have a great history in our country. We have always snatched victory from the jaws of certain defeat. In 1947, we almost lost Srinagar, but we wrested it. And even it was just a foolish No, we don't have the, like, we don't know how to project our own achievements. So that I think I totally agree with you, having worked in the Ministry of Defense and having understood the mechanizations of machinations. And it's General Shivane, thank you very much. There was a question for you, but since we are short of time, I'm going to ask them to send that email to you. And it's a pleasure to have heard this. It's a very, very comprehensive. Anyone wants to do any research has to just have compiled your, and under India's efforts at the laws that we need. And of course, Admiral Shekhar Sinha is a pleasure. Firstly, a great professional and a thorough gentleman and an inspiration for us in many ways. And we thank you for inspiring us to look at the Navy with greater respect for what it is capable of achieving. And I thank you all, and I thank Indic Forum for this opportunity to be here, and General Kochar and all the members. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.